All right, and we're live. This is episode 12 of The Expert and the Idiot. We're here with Ron St. Pierre, which I'm excited. We were just talking, got a fellow Florida native, which I think you're the first.
Oh, well, that's cool.
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk to you. I'm excited to talk to you about keeping animals outdoors too, because that's something I really want to take a stab at.
Right.
Is, try keeping some snakes outside. And what all are you keeping? What all are you keeping, both indoors and outdoors? Like what are some really big things that stand out?
We really don't have anything indoors. Almost everything is outdoors year round. The only time, I mean, it's an extremely rare occasion that we'll bring something in. We do have the ability to do so. And this time of the year, it's pretty much out 24/7. In the winter time, we have the ability to roll inside this big building on nights that it's like, below 55. So we'll normally let everything get down in the, mid 50s. And then if it's going to be below 55, then there's always a chance the local microclimate could dip down into the 40s. So with that in mind, we'll roll the stuff in, but it's only a few species that we do that with. Most of the stuff that we do keep never comes in. So, and that would be, we do a lot of blue-tongued skinks. That's probably our biggest thing. We do a lot of bearded dragons. We have frilled dragons, banana pectinata. We have a large investment in emerald tree boas. We have some chondros. What else? I think that's it for now. We've really been streamlining over the past couple of years, focusing more and more on blue tongues. We have 5 recessive blue tongue mutations in production now, and 2 kind of unknown ones. We're not really sure how they're heritable, but we're not really sure how yet. They're either polygenic or recessive, it appears. And then we have some other blue tongues that we'll be working on in the coming years that may be new things. They may end up being dead ends. We're not sure. And then we work with different species of blue tongues as well. We have occipitalis that actually should have babies any day. And then a bunch of other, different pure versions of, we have Queensland silvers and stuff like that. I did up until this year do a lot of giant anoles, and we did Australian water dragons for a while. And I've kept I mean, dude, honestly, I've been doing this outdoors in Florida since like 1986, and I've probably bred commercially on some sort of a scale, somewhere between 100 and 200 species. But these days, my girlfriend and partner is Heather Moy, so the two of us pretty much work exclusively on, the 5 or 6 species that we do have that we're kind of focusing in, and over time, over the coming years, will be more and more heavily chained to the blue tongues in particular. That we think they're going to be like a substantial thing. Seems like we're sitting on a powder keg right now.
Nice.
So, yeah, but
I want one.
but yeah, I mean, that's kind of always been my thing, was to building outdoor systems, and then trying to, take advantage of, we have almost perfect weather for a lot of things with, you have to learn how to adjust to the whims of the weather. But, once you figure that out and really understand your local weather patterns and all that, a lot of things become possible at that point. So, I've done it forever, man, in three different parts of the state. So,
what year did you start keeping reptiles?
I mean, I've been keeping reptiles since I was a little kid. by the time I was 16, I was living in Miami at the time, and I was basically riding my bike around and walking down the alleyways, catching Cuban anoles and all these, these non-native species that were all over there. And I was making a lot of money as a 16-year-old doing what I already liked to do. So at that point, I ended up dropping out of high school to do this full time. I was a commercial collector exclusively. I also kept stuff. Like I was really into boas and tegus and pythons. So I always had, a collection, but I wasn't a breeder at that point. But I basically was a full-time commercial collector for places like Strictly Reptile, Zoological Imports, Pet Farm, all the big importers. And they would pay me like $5 comes to mind. I think they were paying me $5 per Cuban anole, night anole, the big ones. And I could catch 50 of them in 2 hours. And I could do that a couple times a week. So I was keeping them all supplied with that. And I was trading them for stuff I wanted. And that's by about 1992. So I did that from about 86 to I was 16. So about 84 to 92. And I was building my own collection. Like I was trading Cuban anoles to like Strictly. I traded for the first Motley boa, the original blood boas. Those are two of the things that were big for me in the early years. So I found all that stuff. I would go into Strictly, and they would be in the shipments or whatever. It was a few different importers, but those guys didn't really care back then. It was just like, oh, that's a pretty snake. And it was kind of at the dawn of when people really started to realize, oh, there's all these mutations, and you can find them if you look. So I realized, hey, I've got 4 or 5 importers all within 10 miles or less of where I lived. So I would just make it a point to supply them all with locally caught invasive anole species. And I got in the door, eventually became friends with all of them. And then I got to go through all the shipments myself along with them a lot of times. So I pulled out so much crazy stuff. And it really helped kickstart me into the breeding in the early 90s. But I actually had not intended at that point. Up until 92, I had no intention of being a professional breeder. I always figured I'd be a commercial collector that bred some stuff on the side, and that would be what I ended up doing. But Hurricane Andrew hit Miami in August of 92 and wiped out. It just wiped the city out, and all of my collecting spots were inside the city. And a lot of them were completely annihilated. All the trees were gone. It just wiped out my spots. Mm-hmm. So now I'm, I was like 24 years old at the time, I think. And now I'm sitting there with no way to make a living, really, except I could still do some toads and stuff, like marine toads. But that wasn't enough. So I was like, okay, well, I better figure out how to make this breeding thing work, because otherwise I'm going to be working at a Home Depot or something. So I did. We were broke as hell, and I just jumped in and started. And within about 2 years, I had the blood boas up and going, and that gave me a bump. And then, and then I bought the Murphy patternless leopard geckos were coming on the market for the first time. So I bought a single animal. I'll never forget this. It was probably the springboard that really pushed me forward, was that particular thing. I bought one. I bred it to the nicest yellow leopard gecko I could find. I kept all the babies back. The following year, I had 47 100% het females, maybe like 12 to 15 months after I got that first one. And I bred that to a single Murphy patternless male. I built this giant enclosure with all these barrel tiles, and I put this one male in there with 47 females, and I made so many Murphy patternless and they were selling for real money. It was like the most money I'd ever seen at the time. And they were flying out the door, and it kind of was the springboard that kind of pushed me further. And then I was able to get tegus and more boas and a lot of other things, but I kind of forgotten about a lot of this stuff. But a couple of days ago, my ex-wife found an old box full of photos. I call the fail box because there's a lot of failure in that box. But She gave it to me, and it was from the 90s and probably hadn't been opened since like 95, 96. And it's full of all these 5x7s that we had taken. And there's a lot of cool stuff in there, man. I had a lot of original ball python morphs before they had proved any of them out. I just sold them all. I just looked at ball pythons like, oh, that's never going to go anywhere. So that's why it's a fail box, because it could have been sitting pretty good. And I sold them all to like people like Graziani and McCurley and all those guys. They were all friends of mine. So I'd be like, and they were all totally into the ball python thing, and they were smarter than me. They knew that it was going to be a thing. And I was like, oh no, you guys go do this. This is stupid. I'm going to go do these tegus and monitors and all this stuff.
Yeah,
it is what it is. But yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in there. But that Murphy pattern, there's a picture of the Murphy patternless in there that I got with the original animal I bred it to it. And then there's another photo of this giant vision enclosure, one of those 8 foot, I think it was an 8-foot vision, and it's full of these terracotta barrel tiles. And it worked incredibly well. I had inside the enclosure a full-time a cat litter pan with a full, I basically kept this full of super worms that they could just go in the cat litter pan anytime they wanted and eat super worms. And then I kept the super worms gut loaded. So they were in this cat litter pan on a thick layer of bran with fresh vegetables added every day. The leopard geckos would just go up this little ramp in there, eat the super worms, and it worked really well. I mean, it was definitely one of those things.
That is wild. 1.47.
47. Yep. Yes, it was. It was crazy. But again, that only worked, if you try that and you do that in like a little box, that's not going to work. This was a huge, thing. And it was, the whole floor was barrel tiles. So they had so many hiding areas, and there was like things stacked too. So there was like, a board stacked on top of the barrel tiles. So they had all this hiding area. So it was much more. That's the thing about enclosures, right? A lot of people don't seem to utilize the real estate of any individual enclosure. Like, you can do a lot more than a lot of people. Just kind of put a water bowl, a hide box, and a thing in there. But if you're trying to maximize, you can do some amazing things with small enclosures if you furnish them properly. And so I was always thinking like that.
What were the dimensions of that cage that they were all in? Do you remember?
I think it was an 8-foot. I had a stack of 8-footers.
That's incredible.
It might have been 6-footers, but I'm pretty sure they were 8. I think they were the biggest one they made at the time. I honestly, dude, I haven't had those things in like forever. So shortly after, around the mid 90s, I started getting everything outside. And then once I got everything outside, I never went back to indoor keeping.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, everybody was keeping stuff indoors, and, it was kind of like all the equipment was for that. And so I kind of was just kind of doing what everybody else was doing. But over time, I realized, I can kind of build my own stuff, and I can do, I'm terrible at building stuff, but I'm pretty good at designing, like, putting them in the proper spot to get them catch the most sun, or if they're cooler, I find ways to get them right on the corner, right on the edge of like shaded areas. So I do try to stick within the parameters of species that can both handle heat and relative cool, which gives us actually most of the good stuff, actually, the stuff that really does well in captivity. Most of those occur in areas like that, where they can handle pretty good, pretty high heat, and they can also handle some pretty good cold. So once I stay within those parameters, but I offer them the ability to get whatever they want. So our enclosures are not simple. I mean, they look simple until you really start looking inside them and realize, they got subfloors, so they can get out of any kind of weather condition. They will probably, in some of these, honestly, I think if we ever got hit by a tornado, I think my house would not stand up, but I think a lot of those cages would be just fine.
Wow.
So we kind of think like that, so the animals always have to have security, safety, and they have to have the ability to do that. And once they're underneath almost everything sleeps underneath subfloors or some kind of thing. Like
Can
I'm
you
sorry, go ahead.
explain the subfloor? Like what does that look like from a design perspective?
I mean, basically what I do is I have, so the actual floor, like let's just take a standard one of my outdoor enclosures that has blue tongues in it. The bottom is completely wire. So we build an entire enclosed cage. We don't use any sort of risky, a lot of people try to use no wire bottoms. They try to kind of bury them in a little bit to keep from digging out. But I found over the time that I just everybody that I know that does that eventually has some kind of an issue, whether something digs in or digs out. And then we can't have, especially down here, we can't have stuff running all over. So we build in completely enclosed boxes basically. And then we backfill them with dirt or substrate or whatever it is. And then depending on the species, anywhere from 2 inches to as much as 4 or 5 inches. There's above the bottom of the enclosure is a raised, basically a wood deck. And it covers almost the whole thing except for an entry point, and it's screwed down. And once they're underneath there, even I can't get them out without having to take the whole thing apart. So that comes with some issues. Obviously, you can't just go pull them out whenever you want, but it gives them a hell of a lot of safety and security and the ability to always get cool if they need to. And in the summer and in the wintertime, it lets them stay warm. We'll generally in the wintertime take unopened bags of cypress mulch and just lay them on top of the subfloor, and it acts as insulation. So, and they're all aimed at full sun. So when the sun rises, it hits the unopened bags of cypress mulch and it heats them up, and they're basically work kind of like big heat packs. So they stay warmer longer. And it also acts as insulation for the subfloor beneath. So we do a lot of stuff like that. Most things have shelving in them, so that even animals that are typically considered to be ground dwelling, they can still do some climbing. I found over the years that that seems to be very important for proper muscle development, because nothing truly stays on the ground, right? I mean, even things that are technically ground dwelling still are running over things of relative heights of some sort, like whether it's a big rock or a down tree or stuff like that. So they're always climbing. And if you don't allow them to ever do that, their muscles just don't seem to develop properly.
Wow. So you're really thinking about their overall well-being and their body condition and all that, the amount of exercise they're getting. And
yeah, I mean, for us, both Heather and I are really, we're very much, so we have no employees. It's just the two of us. And one of the reasons that we operate that way is so that when something leaves, we sell something to somebody that's been 100% made by the two of us. Like, it's only gone through our hands. We've done everything involved from feeding and cleaning and general husbandry all the way to basically every step. So it's not like, we have basically full creative and control over it. And so that's important to both of us. And that's something that that's never going to change. Even with our expansion, the stuff we're expanding to is just stuff that we will go to basically a limit where as soon as we feel like we're exceeding where we're getting like the most out of everything that we're doing, then we either stop it there or we dial it back a little bit. So we're constantly turning the dial on that. But that's one of the things that's kept me going for 40 years. I mean, I've outlasted a lot of my contemporaries, and she's been doing it now for almost 20 years. So between the two of us, we've been around a long time. And it's, I think that's a big part of the reason why we've stayed relevant. And we're both, we're both pretty well known in the industry and in the hobby in general. So, because if we send something out, it's something that we would want to receive. That's basically our baseline thing, is that we try not to send out anything we wouldn't want to get ourselves. So
That's such a refreshing perspective, to think of it from that point of view, instead of how quick can I produce this and get it out to somebody, and never see it again. It's you're thinking more of what the customer would want to see when they open the box.
Yeah, it's also not the path to getting ahead financially, really. I mean, this place costs us a lot. We put we basically almost take nothing for the two of us. Like we basically live like a very modest, we're not out buying new cars. We're not out buying, we don't spend money on, most of the money goes back in the business. We buy the highest quality of everything that we can afford to do. So it all just goes back. But we end up, the real reward for this is that we don't have to punch a clock. We're getting to do what we both love doing. And I mean, I have never had to answer to anyone since I was 16 years old. I don't know that I could now at this point if I had to. But for me, that's like the big takeaway. And if that's all I ever got out of this, then I'd be totally cool with that, because that's really all I wanted was my freedom and to be able to not. I mean, a lot of my friends, man, they work jobs they hated, and then they get in their 50s and 60s, and now, they're not at the top of their game anymore. They're kind of breaking down, and now you're, our system says, oh, well, now you can go ahead and have a retirement and go enjoy yourself. Well, what good is that if you grinded your 40 or 50 best years away to just, oh, here's this little bonus at the, as you're getting old, you can now go and enjoy yourself. And I just couldn't bring myself to do that, man. I was looking at that and looking at the shit my dad went through and stuff. And I was just like, no, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. So, people lose pensions.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
Retirement.
No security.
Yeah. And retirement is a fairly new concept. It's not, but everybody wants that. Everybody wants the security, but what do you give away for it?
Yep. And really the security is sort of an illusion. There's lots of people that never get it. What if you die on the way to getting that?
Yeah.
Now I mean, you never know. Tomorrow is not promised. I could walk out of that door tonight and get run over by a friggin' bus.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
don't do that.
No, but you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, I think, I was always kind of a troublemaker with that regard. I just I don't like being told what to do. And so that kind of pushed me along. And I feel like if I got nothing else out of this, that was the reward that I got. So but I've been able to make a living the whole time. I mean, we've been able to keep food on the table and a roof over our head. And, we haven't done, I mean, I think we're doing pretty good now. I've had years where it was pretty rough, but it was never to the point where I was, it was like super desperate or anything. It was just like, okay, this is a downtime. This sucks. You got to tighten your belt and kind of ride it out. And most of that was just me making stupid decisions. At the time, I thought setting up 250 tegus was a good idea.
That's a lot of tegus.
Oh, dude, it was terrible. it basically cratered, and it cratered, almost put me out of business in 2005. I had to, I actually took 2 years off after it finally cratered, and I sold everything off to lick my wounds and get back to try to come back from that. That was a rough one. I put a lot of effort and energy over about a 15-year period, and then found out that it's too many. And to my knowledge, no one's been able to do it on that scale. Like there are people that have like 50 or 100 of them, and they do really well up until that. But something about it. Well, actually, I know what it is that basically baby tegus are kind of ticking time bombs. Unless you can house them singly, which is very difficult to do on an animal that grows that fast.
Yeah.
You have a limited amount of time that you got to distribute them. And so if you can't get them out fast enough, all of a sudden you end up with missing tails, missing toes, and they're time bombs. So kudos to the guys that like Jesse Harden and those guys that are still grinding them things away. I don't know how the hell they do it, because I did really well with them when I had 50. And that was another species that I really built my name and reputation off of in the 90s was breeding blue tegus and albino tegus. And But once I tried to expand above that, wow, that was a mistake. So,
They're such cool animals. It's too bad you can't keep them in Florida anymore.
Yeah, no, I mean, and they banned them in other states too. And there are other states that really they couldn't possibly live in that are looking at that. So I don't know what the problem is. The media, turn that into this big fear fest like they do with, anything they can. I mean, they're a problem in Florida for sure. Like the idiots that let those things go really kind of set up the whole, gave the whole industry a black eye.
Yeah.
But and it does actually look like it's primarily this one importer that was in Miami. And then apparently a lot of people, not people, but FWC knew that he had them running all over his property, and I guess they didn't do anything. So now they've kind of spread all over down there. I mean, I went down there myself a couple of years ago because I'm from Miami, and when I lived there, there were no tegus. I mean, I would have been out there collecting them every day if you could have done that. But I went down there to look for them, and I saw some. They were easy to find. I mean, you go to the spots, and they're there, and there's a lot of them.
How big are they?
I saw them anywhere from little baby ones up to like 3-footers, like
Wow.
5-pounders or so.
What do you have invasive around you?
There's really not much here in Orlando. The freezes kill off most of that shit. We have red-headed agamas. I see those all over the place, but they're pretty.
We've got those too.
Yeah,
they're so cool.
Yeah, they are. They're fast, and they're like people think they're bearded dragons. I cannot tell you how many people. There's bearded dragons loose in Florida. No, they send you a picture of it. I'm like, no, that's a red-headed agama, but thanks for playing. Try again.
Yeah.
And we have curly tails here, which those have been in Florida forever, and those were not introduced by the pet trade. Those came to Florida via cruise ships to Palm Beach County in like the 50s, and they've been expanding their range ever since. They may have actually been here longer than that.
The agamas, were they released intentionally? How did they? Because they've been around for a long time too, right? Since like the 60s or 70s.
They have. When I was growing up in Miami in the 80s, we used to catch them underneath the I-95 overpasses. Like a lot of the I-95 overpasses had colonies of them. So when we were kids, we used to ride our bikes. I lived near I-95, and we used to just ride under there, and we would chase them up and down. They're really fast, and we catch quite a few. They'd try to run into a hole, and then you'd get them. So that's like that would have been early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And so they were in North Miami and Medley and all those places back then. It's shocking how they're all over the place, but I'm pretty sure that what you're seeing with those is basically importers that got in shipments of them that were crappy or whatever, that weren't sellable, and then they would just dump them because they should not be in Sanford. They shouldn't be, on Sarasota. You know what I'm saying? They should not be all over the state like they are, because, I mean, Nightingales have been in here since the 50s. They were intentionally released by the University of Miami, and they're not really found as. I mean, we have Nightingales here too. So, but those got moved around mostly by most of the big landscaper plant dealers are in South Florida.
Oh, that makes sense.
Anoles have a habit of liking to lay their eggs in potted plants. I mean, that's how we do it. We give them potted plants, they lay their eggs in them, we get the eggs out. So it's super simple. And all of those nurseries in South Florida have night anoles, and all brown anoles too. And so the anoles would lay eggs in there. They would sell the plants. They deliver them like up here to like Orlando. There's a lot of them in the Disney parks, and the Disney parks bought a lot of plants from South Florida, brought them in. So once they get here, they can survive the colds pretty good. So they're kind of impervious to it. Things like green iguanas can't survive here, I don't think, because they, by all accounts, if they could, they'd be here, and they're not.
We have the Mexican spiny tails where we're at.
Yeah. I've actually collected them on the West Coast when I was a kid. We used to go over there and get them. There's a ton of them on that island down there. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's one of those islands near Fort Myers.
Oh, Sanibel.
No, not on Sanibel. We used to go to Sanibel too, but
Yeah, we've got.
Marco Island.
Yeah. We've got them all over around the beaches here and everything. If you go out towards the beach, you start seeing them more and more all
Spiny
over.
tails.
Yeah, all over storefronts and all that. And in fact, me and my kids were out herping, collecting some, and we use like the little, Timu or Temu fish traps and just
Right.
fill it up with crickets, and everything just runs in there. And it's like,
Yep.
and you pull out a spiny tail and, in Sarasota County, and it's like, how did he even get here? This little guy.
Those are probably expansion from Marco Island, or again, importers got bad shipments. It was a common thing back in the 70s and 80s for them to do. So a lot of this stuff got here that way. Some of it, like, it's blamed on unscrupulous or what is it, irresponsible pet owners, but it takes so many introductions at the same time to trigger. I mean, just think about that for a minute. What are the chances that some rando pet owner is going to dump, they go out and they dump their pet, and then some other rando pet owner comes around with the opposite sex animal at roughly the same time and dumps it in the same spot? Get the fuck out of here with that. That is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. And all of those things, if you actually, so when I was a kid, my grandmother used to collect the phone books for South Florida, for Miami, the Bell South phone books. And I realized that she had them going back like to the 40s, I think, like whenever she had old ones way back. So as a kid, I realized, I can open up the phone books and find reptile dealers, the addresses of them, and then go there and see if there's anything loose. And almost to a place, every one I ever went to, I found all kinds of stuff. And so,
you're a smart dude. I never would have thought to do that.
Well, it was an accident, right? So I'm looking through the phone book actually for a comic book store when I was like 14 or 15 years old, and as I'm thumbing through it, there was an ad for a reptile dealership called Sika Animals, and I was like, and that's not far from my house. So we went over there, rode our bikes over there. It was like 10 or 15 blocks away. And sure enough, as soon as we got there, green iguanas, we caught Honduran wood turtles just walking down the road. There was all this crazy stuff. So once I realized that, I was like, okay, now I'm going to go. So I would sit in my grandmother's closet, going through these phone books and then writing down the addresses. And then, as I got older, I started taking metro buses and to get farther and farther away. And every single place I went to, and you can pretty much do that today. If you look back in time, you can find wherever there's colonies of this sort of stuff. It's not 100%. There are some, like I said, there are some things like curly tails that came in on cruise ships. There's some things that probably came in, like banana shipments and stuff like that. Over time, they built up. So, but it takes a lot of introductions. You're not just, pet owners are not causing this. It's really, if you think about it, almost everything out there, it's in an alien environment. It doesn't know the environment. Most of the shit sticks out like a sore thumb. So all the birds and everything else are going to pick them off. So it takes a lot and, or, a fair number over time, over and over again. So it takes like a dealership, something like that. So, that's just the reality of it. And it doesn't operate that way anymore now. I mean, things have changed a lot in the last 20 years, 30 years. But, going back 30 years ago, 40 years ago and beyond, that's how it was. And so, I mean, if you go to any of these canals and you drop a line in with a worm on it, you're going to catch all kinds of exotic fish. And when you're out, down south, especially, there are huge colonies of parrots everywhere, all sorts. I mean, I was down there recently and saw a big flock of scarlet macaws just flew right over. And I was like, wow, that's awesome.
That's insane.
Yeah.
We have Quakers.
Yes.
I think that's all we have are the green. We have a conure as well. There's some kind of a conure.
The black face conures.
Yep.
Yeah. I've seen those. Yep. Yeah, I've seen huge flocks of them too.
Did you see that Asian water monitor that was walking around right in my neighborhood?
I did see it. So that was over there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that. That was all over the place. And when I saw that, I thought, here comes another black eye.
I know, doesn't it? Like, I want to get a black dragon. And
Right.
so I saw that and I got so depressed where I was like, oh, this is not going to be good.
Well, hopefully they get it resolved pretty quick.
Yeah.
But again, that's one animal. Nothing's going to come of that other than the public, freak out. But that thing's not going to go out there and lay eggs, and there's not going to be a water monitor colony.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, the only real colony of Varanus in this state is the Nile monitors that have been on Cape Coral for about 30 years. And the only reason they can survive there and that they actually do pretty well there is because they're in the perfect spot where they have enough food to reproduce via all the nesting birds that go there every year and all the crabs. There are very few places in Florida, anywhere, probably in the US, that have enough monitors requiring an immense amount of food to basically go through the reproductive cycle. And there's just not a lot of places where they can get that much food. But if you have nesting birds that come once a year and fill up these little mangrove islands, and you can just go in the nests and rob the hell out of them, yep, that's going to be enough to trigger them. And that's why they keep going. And there are probably other places. I can think of a couple places in the Miami area that could occur, but nobody's going to go out there and dump Varanus, probably. I mean, they shouldn't have ever did it. Whoever did that, however those got there, is kind of like an unknown thing. But yeah. I mean, everybody was pretty pissed off when we found out that was a thing, because that was clearly going to be a problem. You can't have a big alien predator, But fortunately, they've been confined there, and they've never been able to expand their range beyond that because they've run out of food. So nothing really they can do.
Have you ever seen them?
Yeah, I've actually collected them down there. It was a long time ago, like 20 years ago. I went down there. They were on the seawalls and really hard to get close to. But I was using a 30-foot telescopic noose pole that I had made, and that would allow me to get right up to them. And I was able to catch one or two that were right basically along a seawall that let me get a noose on them. But they're most of the time, as soon as you can see them from a distance, as soon as you pull up, they're gone, and they jump into the ocean.
Wow.
But they're in there. They're in that one spot, and they're not going anywhere. So they're a problem, but they're not what it could have been. And I think that's going to be the case for all Varanus.
Yeah.
So,
do you still go out and collect or herp?
I haven't since about 2006.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, about 2006, I moved. So I lived in Miami till 99. In 99, I moved to West Palm Beach and lived there till 2006. And up until that point, I was still herping. There was a lot of places to herp in West Palm. But after I moved to a place called Lake Placid in the center of the state, then I basically just kind of stopped. It was all native stuff. I've never been big on collecting the native stuff. But I have a 10-acre property over there that's got indigos and Florida pine snakes on it and gopher tortoises. Wow. So it's pretty cool. So that kind of herping I do when I go over there. I don't go down there much. My parents live on it. But when I do go down there, I always flip boards and stuff that we have laying all over the property from the hurricanes. And every once in a while, you'll find like a giant coach whip or a pine snake and rarely an indigo. But it's pretty cool, man, to see that stuff. I mean, there's all these giant snakes right there in that area. So it's kind of a cool place to see that stuff. So,
can you keep indigos in Florida?
I know some people do. I think there's some kind of permit you can get. I'm not sure how difficult it is to get it. And actually all the indigo species, those are perfectly suited for outdoor keeping here.
Yeah.
Like I had a pair of rubinus that for a while, I only had them here for a year, but they bred and I sold them to a buddy of mine. And then like 2 weeks later, they laid eggs for him. And I was like, oh my God. I had seen them breeding. I basically put them in a 16-foot long, 3-foot tall outdoor enclosure and gave them an underground burrow. I basically buried a half a sheet of plywood under the ground and dug out like a hole underneath it. And that's where they went, and they lived underneath there, and they would come out, bask all day. And, they were awesome, man. I always thought if I was going to do another snake outside, which I'm not, because I got to stay focused on this blue tongue thing. But if I was, it'd be Crebos and any of the indigo species that we could keep here without, an issue.
How many chondros are you keeping outside?
I'm trying to think. We had gotten rid of some of them. We had a lot of extra males. I think we have 6 pairs plus a couple of extra ones.
Wow.
Yeah, they do chondros, man. They do real well outside.
Really?
The emeralds do too, but emeralds come with a whole block of issues that have to be dealt with that we're currently battling. But the chondros they were super easy. As soon as they were set up, we keep them in 4 by 4 by 2 foot outdoor enclosures, not screen, but vinyl coated wire enclosures made with aluminum framing. And then we put an overhead sprinkler system that's 10 feet in the air that shoots straight up, that I can turn on at any time I want, and it simulates rain events.
Whoa.
So when there's no natural rain, then we can do that. And so that's how I keep them very well hydrated. I'll run it for 1 to 2 hours at a time during dry spells. So we do that for the emeralds and the chondros. And yeah, I've got that actually in 2 spots. So I have a 2,500, 2,000 square foot building, something like that. I have a double overhead sprinkler that covers the entire, basically the front of the building. So I can do the whole thing. And then, but that building's hard to keep warm. So in the wintertime, I have a 2-car garage attached to the house that I gutted and then turned it into what is essentially an oven. In the wintertime, I can keep it in the 90s easily and cheaply. And then we put another sprinkler system out in front of the garage on the garage pad, so that on warm winter days, I can roll the snakes all outside, fire up the water, rain on them for an hour or two, and then roll them back into the oven, and everybody's good.
Nice.
So
are you using any substrate, or are you just using whatever is on the ground? Like if you have, okay. So couple questions with let's talk about just the chondros and the emeralds. Those are the only snakes you have outside, right?
right now. Yeah.
Okay.
I've done other stuff, but yeah.
And we'll get to temperature. I have so many questions because I want to start doing this. I want to start keeping some stuff outside, and I really want to pick your brain on this. So the cages, are they up off the ground, or are those built the same way that you're doing the lizard cages? Where
no, those are all up off the ground. Like the emerald cages most of them are set up. The bottoms are about 4 feet off the ground, so that the tops are 2 feet higher than the top of my head. And that's to offer them the arboreal security. I found a long time ago that with arboreal stuff, I mean, it's kind of like a common thing. If people that work with arboreals know this, that if you keep them in a way that allows them to be higher than everything else, that it basically is a stress reducer, and a pretty substantial one, it seems. So we try to do that. Now the chondros currently are not set up that way. They're on carts. They can get about eye level is about the highest they can currently get, but that will be changed. Eventually they will all be out on these, raised platforms that they'll be pretty high in the air. But the condor and emerald thing I started last year, so it's kind of been a work in progress, and I keep iterating on it, trying to find, what I feel is perfect. I feel like for the most part, that's going to be the final step. Everything else is pretty good, at least in regards to the chondros. The emeralds, like I said, they're all imports. They have all the problems that imports have. And we've been working out trying to actually deconstruct and figure out exactly why they're so problematic in captivity. Seems like there's a lot of we made some progress recently that's looking promising. So once I understand it and know that it's continues in this direction, then I'm gonna obviously I'll talk about it a lot more. But right now it's kind of one of those things where I'm not really sure. This thing could all crater on me, but it is looking more positive over the last couple months than it was previously. Like it was really the first 8 months with the emeralds was super good. I had no regurgs. Everything was pounding food. It was doing really good. And then 8 months in, I got a round of regurges, and then I did some things and it looked like I fixed it. And then I got more later on. And then, so I started doing some different things and started finding some positive direction, but I still wasn't sure. I think it's related to basically what I think is that emerald tree boas are very sensitive to the food we feed the rodents, but it might be the rodents themselves. And obviously, it's just like humans, it's not 100%. Like every human doesn't have irritable bowel syndrome, but a whole hell of a lot of us do. Every human doesn't have a peanut allergy, but a lot of people do.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this case, we're looking at an animal that is very sensitive to that. And after months and months in captivity of being fed this, eventually you're damaging their gut each time a little bit, and eventually you reach a tipping point and they start to regurgitate. And once they start to regurgitate, it's just screwing up their gut biome and everything. So then you have to try to put that back to try to do, and there's just all the, and it also dehydrates them too. So you're fighting all these things. And I'm pretty sure that that's where regurgitation syndrome comes from. Now, in the past, people have had this and gone and looked at it, had vet work done, and they find a variety of things, pathogens and stuff. And so those end up being the blame, like say they find a little bit of crypto, they find a little bit of chlamydia. There's a bunch of different things that those snakes they have in the wild. They're not dying in the wild. They're not dead all over the place. So why is it that when we bring them in captivity after a while, they start to break down? And it does seem like it also seems to be somewhat prevalent in other snakes, coincidentally, from the same region. And all of these large snakes, red-tailed boa constrictors, it's a known thing, true red tails. It's a known thing in some of the large tropical rat snakes. It's a known thing in like certain rainbow boas. So all of those snakes feed on this arboreal fruit-eating rodent. So they're not eating rodents that are eating rodent chow that are loaded with all kinds of chemicals. There's antibiotics and all kinds of stuff in a lot of that feed. So is that what's happening? Is it a buildup that just damages their gut a little bit at a time? And some of them are more susceptible to it than others. And that's why it looks like you're getting some sort of a disease bloom, because all of a sudden you have large numbers of them just start breaking down. It looks like it's spreading. Or is it an accumulation and you're reaching a tipping point where you push them off the edge? And that's what I'm trying to figure out. And we recently made some progress after we started doing a few different methods, some different things. So I don't know. At this point, I'm still up in the air with them. I put a lot of effort and time over the last year into those things, trying to figure it out. I may not, but I might. So it's, I'll basically, I think I'll have a better idea in another 6 months, whether or not what we're doing now is the fix. Because I have been able to, a lot of people have told me that once they start regurging that they don't ever hold down a meal again, but that has not been the case. I've got a lot of them to stop. Some of them then do it again, but then I'm able to stop it again. And I only have 2 out of like 56 that just, I can't get them to hold down anything. but I also haven't really, I just started trying this new thing. So if those stop and it fixes it, then I have even more of a smoking gun in this direction. But as of right now, on that particular end, I don't have much to say other than that. I do have I am working on it, and I think, it might end up being something. But I also could be totally wrong. This whole thing could just crater and I'll be left with, well, I don't know. But 40 years, those things have been coming in at least. And they're one of the most sought after snakes in the trade. Why has no one done them on any sort of a scale at all? They're almost non-existent in the trade, captive bred ones. Yeah, there are people that have, a clutch here, a clutch there, but then they stop. You don't find them at shows. It's extremely rare. When was the last time you saw a table of captive bred emeralds at a show? And a lot of times when you do, and you start asking questions, you find out those were imported. It was from an imported gravid one.
Yeah.
So that says that to me, I do not believe the idea that, they're all like seriously diseased and that's why. That does not track at all with just everything else. There's no way. They catch them, they're fine. They blame the holding areas in situ, but then when some of those shipments, those animals are hardly held for any period of time. And I'm very well versed in the import side of this in the US. And I mean, anything that comes through places that import hordes of animals from all over the place and hold them sometimes for weeks or months at a time should be churning out massive amounts of disease things. But if you're taking them straight from the country of origin and they're not even seeing the inside of a place like that, like you're taking them straight from the airport home, there's no reason why they should be doing this, but they are. So I just feel like there's enough holes in the disease thing that I'm quite sure they're carrying all of the stuff they find. And so is everything else, including a lot of captive bred stuff. So most of those things, even crypto, not a death sentence. It occurs. It's around. It's all over the place. It's common in the environment. You're never going to get away from it. And when the animal's immune system is good and you're taking care of them properly, you'll never even know. They're fine. But if something goes wrong, that's a different story. And it's almost always the fault of the keeper, even though again, that's just the way it is. You're responsible for all that, and that kind of shit can happen. So knowing all that, and after, like I said, 40 years, a lot of the 40 years I've spent has been imports. I mean, when I start a project, I oftentimes will do things that either are not available as captive bred animals, or I want imports so I have control over the bloodline. So I know exactly what I have. They're all fresh out of the wild. I've got a diverse colony. And I've done that with hundreds of species. These emeralds have beat me to the ground, to be honest, over the last year trying to figure this out. So, but that's also why I decided to take this on. I figured if I can figure this out, then, I mean, obviously selfishly, I would like to be one of the people that are producing them on a regular basis and can put captive bred ones on my table at every big show that Heather and I vend at. But it's also, I'm not going to sit on that. If I do figure this out, I'm going to tell everybody because, I don't really worry or care about the competition. I'll still, no matter what, sell my stuff. And I want to see, them flourish in the hobby. Doesn't do you any good if you're the only one producing something and you don't help other people do it, because if you don't, you can't build a market that way. So that, anyway, that's what I'm doing with that. And we totally got off track, and but yeah, the chondros. So the chondros, were super cake. Like, I put them outside, they eat, they do everything they're supposed to. The only thing I haven't done is breed them yet. This will be the first year, and I expect to produce them if I don't cancel that project. They are one that I've been considering just focusing on the emeralds. Because the skinks are, like I said, we're ramping up on those. We're producing all these morphs that have to be tracked and hats and all that. And, Heather generally has done all of that, but at some point she's not going to be able to do all of that by herself. Like she does 100% of the husbandry of the skinks and the dragons, and she's amazing at it. But it will eventually get to a point where one person will not be able to do that, and so I'm lightening down on. We're basically, both of us are shedding ourselves of any project that, because we had probably had 15 species going here.
Wow.
For a while. And then, so we're dropping them all to focus pretty heavily on the blue tongues.
That's cool that you're so zeroed in on like one lizard and one snake.
Yeah. I mean, we'll end up with six things that we do. 3 of them. The snake thing is, mostly the reason that because initially I thought the emerald thing was going to be easier than it turned out to be. But I thought, I can easily handle 2 species at once on top of all this other stuff. But yeah, I've been considering dropping the chondros, but I don't know. I really every time I think about it, I go out there, and as soon as I open the enclosures, they're right in your face waiting to eat. They're fast. They're so different than emeralds, and they look amazing when they're coiled up on their branches and stuff. And so I don't know that I can bring myself to get rid of them. So they'll probably end up staying, but it'll never be more than whatever it is, like 6 pairs or something like that.
So do they have substrate in their cages?
No, they're substrateless. So they're basically, they're just big wire enclosures. The emerald ones have utility sinks for the base. So I take 2 utility sinks and screw them onto the bottom of this 4-foot enclosure, this 4-foot screen enclosure that sits on top. So it's 4x4x2. And that they screw on top of 2 utility sinks, and the utility sinks are mounted, 4 feet off the ground. The utility sinks are good because with the emeralds, I can flood them whenever I want and have them over a water substrate, or I can dry them out whenever I want and then keep them that way. And the sinks are easy to clean. You just wash anything out. It's like a win-win. The chondros, I didn't do the sinks for because they're not quite as wet as the emeralds. That looks like rainfall, just a normal rainfall in our normal humid, water vapor that's in our air here is enough. But if I ever felt like they needed more water, I would just, again, their enclosures are made so that I can actually just screw utility sinks to the bottom of them. So,
and you said that they're in 4x4x2, correct?
Yeah, that's probably not the exact dimensions. It's probably more like 4x4x20, because I think the utility sinks are a little shy of 2, maybe 22. But we generally go 4 foot by 4 foot. So, and that's for 1 to 2 snakes. Really, I would like to go much larger and do them in flight cages, but because I wasn't really sure how they would do in the wintertime, and whether or not I would have to bring them in. These enclosures were built to fit 3 enclosures on these big Home Depot carts that I have. So in the wintertime, I could just pop them in the carts and then get them in and out on good days and keep them inside in the oven during the days that are shitty. So that's kind of why we went with those dimensions. But, the chondros, I've noticed, don't seem to really care about how cold it, they seem like 40s and 50s are fine as long as they can bask the next day, which they spend a lot of time basking. So do the emeralds. I'm still
sorry.
No, go ahead.
The whole temperature thing is intriguing. Is there too hot of temperatures that you've experienced where you're like, all right, this is too much, I gotta cool them down? Or is that just when you say, screw it, I'm turning on the sprinkler and I'm going to simulate rain and that'll cool them down enough?
Yeah, I mean, I've done some of that. I have found that the emeralds they will bask until they hit a body temperature of 97 degrees. And then they seem to try to regulate it and not keep it at 97. So that seems to be their upper limit of their preferred temperature.
That's crazy. That's so hot.
I know. Most people keep them at 86. So that was one of the things I thought. I was like, okay, well, they're keeping them at 86. So they're body temperatures they're never really hitting operating temperature that way, even if you're using like a radiant heat panels and stuff. I just don't know that they're actually getting as hot as they really need it. The problem is when you're keeping them inside, though, those kind of temperatures can be lethal because you're talking about artificial control at that point. And outside, though, it's a different game. They can get to 80, 97, but there's also wind that helps cool them down. There's shaded areas that are a significant drop in temperature. And that's why we build as large enclosures as possible for within reason, so that they have options, right? Keeping stuff outside is all about giving it as many options and covering all the bases. Like, is the weather shitty today? What, can it also, if you're building anything outdoors, I can tell you right now, it's very important that everything be south facing. So you got to figure out where south is, in relation to wherever you're going to put the stuff. You want to orient it all to the south. That's super important. It's actually makes keeping stuff outside kind of difficult because there's all this stuff that can screw that up. There's trees in the way. There's, and you want basically to take advantage of the sun, and its motion through the sky at all times of the year. So when we decide we're going to set up something new, one of the things I do is I'll go out at like 9 a.m., take a picture of where I'm thinking about, putting the stuff. And then I'll go back out at noon and take a picture, and then back out at 5. And I'll do this over the course of 6 or 8 months until I see how the sun is working in relation to the spot. And if I have enough, what I feel like enough coverage of sun, then that's where they'll go. If not, then I have to find a new spot, or I have to figure out, can I trim this tree, and will that make a difference? It's just not the one thing about keeping stuff outside. People seem to think, oh, you just throw the stuff outside and it breeds. No. Actually, keeping stuff outside is incredibly complicated. You really need to understand your personal microclimate. It's definitely doable, but it's not as easy as having a climate control room that you can just put it in and hit a button and you know exactly what it's going to be. But it has significant rewards for being able to do so. Like, it really, really helps. Like, I'm one of the, as far as I know, I'm one of the few, I don't want to phrase it like that. So I've known a lot of like large reptile producers, commercial producers. A lot of them have had over the, at different times of the year, at some point they've had these mass die-offs, because if something gets into a climate control room, well, you've got not only do you have the perfect environment for the animals that are in there, but you also have the perfect environment for pathogens in a lot of cases. Like, viruses and shit can run amok. That's why they have super bugs in hospitals. You couple that fact with the fact that we use quats for everything, the antimicrobial, things, they tend to create super bugs. So you got to be careful of that. When you keep stuff outside, it's not really an issue. Like, I have never had a significant die-off because I have the sun that's UV sterilizing things. It's hard for pathogens like that to be transferred around outdoors. There's all these things that go to inhibit it, plus the heat. It's super hot sometimes. Sometimes it's super cold. All those things go to give you protection. And then on top of that, you're giving the animals the ability to get whatever they want, not what you want them to get, but whatever they want. And that's a significant difference that absolutely makes a big difference. So you can, like we were talking about initially in the beginning, you can set it up in a way where you promote muscle, use. Like, one of the things I found out early on when I started the giant anole thing is I initially had put all these big, thick branches in the enclosures with them, right? Because every time I had seen them in the wild, they were always on big trees. So I was like, oh, I just have to put a couple big stumps in there for them to get on, and it'll be good. Well, it turned out after about a year into it, I started noticing that my anoles, their arms were like permanently out like this. So they kind of like flutter around like that. And I was like, what the hell? And then I realized it's similar to something that had already been recorded with chameleons, where if you don't give them a variety of sizes of branches and stuff to climb on, their feet kind of don't form properly. So they're kind of
Mm.
like this, they have like this flappy foot thing.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, that must be the anole version of it. So I started adding all these different size branches and totally went away and never came back.
Wow.
So once I realized that, then it became like a thing with me that I wanted proper muscle development. And then Heather's made her own tons of observations of the same thing with bearded dragons. Bearded dragons kept, in the standard bearded dragon thing, which forces this semi-arboreal lizard to live on the ground, which it does not do. They're spend a lot. And when you give them the opportunity to climb, they absolutely use it. And they spend the majority of their time off the ground on branches and trees and ledges and stuff like that.
That's why they got the hammock, dude.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have these, I mean, the whole industry is full of these kinds of myths but I mean, all you have to do is, take a look at some natural history. But most of us these days just kind of go to these kind of like social media kind of outlets, and it's all husbandry stuff, but a lot of the husbandry stuff is incorrect, or it's not. Even if it's correct for a certain situation, it's not like this rule that has to be followed, which a lot of these things that have become that are just absolutely idiotic and so far from even close to being optimal. They're like, it's like the lowest common denominator has come to rule those areas, which I get it if you're new, and you're just getting in and, simplifying it for the newbie. That's a good thing. But we really have to have a low barrier of entry, but we need to have we have a high skill ceiling. So bearded dragons are a good example. They're pretty much anybody can breed them if they chose to, right? It's a children's pet essentially. Mm-hmm. But to produce good bearded dragons that are structurally sound, that are healthy, that are vibrant, that is a whole other game. And the amount of thought and work that has to go into that is most people probably have no clue. They just think, oh, I see them in all the pet stores. Yep, you do. And a lot of those are mass produced in very large facilities that crank out large numbers of mediocre pets. But if you want really good ones that are really badass looking and structurally sound and live as long as they, as possible and are super healthy, and that's a whole other thing. They have a nice high skill ceiling, and that's most of the best things do. Like most of the really popular reptile species have a low barrier of entry, but a high skill ceiling. And that's true of blue tongues. It's true of even ball pythons. I mean, there's a world of difference between Canova and like the average ball python you'll see in the pet store or in some of the shows.
Can you explain like the difference?
He just produces very high quality, very well thought out mutations and ball pythons. So I mean, he puts a lot of thought into it. It's they're like carefully crafted, right? So a lot of people just kind of throw whatever stuff together, see what comes out. But this guy, I mean, he's made a name for himself, and he is sitting in the position he's in because he's at the, he's taken it into the stratosphere as far as what's possible. And I mean, like I said, there's other ones out there. He's just the main one that comes to mind. But I really don't pay attention to ball python people, but he sticks out, like very sticks out. So I
just
pay
doing
attention
it right.
to that. Yeah, he's like I said, that guy has earned everything that he has. So, and there's a lot of people in this industry that do that. I mean, we have a ton of amazing breeders of all across the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And you want that. You need to have, everybody needs to work their way up. A lot of those guys that are at the current time probably doing, like some mediocre stuff, eventually some of them will hit the skill ceiling. They'll get up in the top of the skill ceiling at some point. Because as long as they keep plugging away, anybody can hit it. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that a lot of the stuff that I produced in the beginning was mediocre. And I know for a fact I produced a lot of mediocre stuff for at least a decade. Like I was trying to feel my way through it. I did a lot of numbers. I didn't really think about a lot of things. Most of the way I think about things now is an accumulation of 40 years of grinding away at this. and also keeping track of the entire industry. I watch a shit ton of podcasts. I watch a ton of YouTube. I read a lot of stuff on Facebook. I talk to a ton of people. I stay very, very, and I mean, there's actually not a lot of, so I'm 55. So a lot of the guys that came up around the same time that I did, they don't really engage in like, social media. They don't do podcasts. They're asked, but they won't go as guests and stuff. I've made sure that I stay relevant in that arena because otherwise I have no intentions of ever retiring. I'm going to do this till they put me in the ground. And so I know that for me to keep going, I always have to, I just don't stop moving. If you stop moving, you're done. So I'm always trying to push forward, trying to push into new things. That's one of the things I find interesting, but it also keeps us, and Heather's exactly the same way. It's all about, continuing to try to stay at or hit the ceiling, whatever the ceiling is for a given thing. So, I don't know.
So what are your thoughts on UV? I mean, you've talked about the sanitizing nature of the sun and all that. How do you feel about, like, let's say somebody was going to get a blue tongue skink from you and maybe their name is Adam and, would you recommend that they use, UV? Like how would you set that animal up indoors?
I mean, if it was me, I would use UV and overhead heat lights. But see, I can come at this at two angles because there are plenty of people that have done blue tongues for decades in CB70 racks and have been very successful without any UV, and their animals are nice. They've been around a long time, so clearly they're doing something right, because you don't last that long or do something, without it working. So it does work for sure. They don't need it, but then the phrase "don't need it," I mean, can it be better do they need it to the point where is it better to offer them it? Do they benefit from it greatly? Do they benefit from it just a little? A lot of those things are unknown. And then there's also the fact of, are the UV lights anywhere near what that big blazing ball in the sky does? And I tend to think no. So with that in mind, I honestly, dude, I don't think it matters as long as it doesn't matter to you. It's like one of those things that'll work both ways. So is it better for your situation to run them without UV, as long as you're offering them the good food, and they have the proper heating source, whatever that is for your individual situation. I don't like giving husbandry advice because the industry is like so full, not the industry, but the hobby is so full of misinformation with regards to husbandry. Like if you go on a lot of these groups, you'll see things like, "Oh, this is the only way to do something." Get fucked with that. That is nonsense. That is not the only way to do it. There's usually a lot better ways to do something than a lot of the recommended ways to do things. It's just, so
that's why I love husbandry advice, because I honestly, I love hearing the difference of opinions from as many people as possible, so I can choose the one that fits me best. And maybe even if it's just 2% better for the animal, then it's worth it, in my opinion. Even if it's like, hey, you know what? Maybe UVB, maybe it'll make their immune system function 2% better, and then maybe it'll make me feel a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is there's a reason why we do things the way we do, because we feel like, outdoor, you can't beat nature. All the humans are never going, there's nothing that you can do. We will never outdo nature, period. The lights will never be as good as the sun. There's no technology that's ever going to change that. mean, nature just, that's the pinnacle of what's possible. So we always try to take advantage of that when possible. And so in that regard, what I would say is, yeah, you don't need to have UV lights, but if you can get your animals outside for a portion of the year, that's going to make a big difference. So that, and it's way more fun. Not, I mean, and I mean that when I say a lot of the reasons that we do the things we do, besides that we feel like it's the best for the animals, is also because it's a hell of a lot more fun than having something in an opaque rack that you just open it up, you see it for a couple minutes, and you close the rack, and you don't see it again. But her and I spend a lot of time just walking around amongst all the enclosures, and you see them doing all kinds of cool stuff because they have the ability to do a lot of cool stuff. That's just, I mean, you can do that inside, like that enclosure behind you is a good example of that. If you furnish it right, yep, you can do a lot. And I've seen amazing things done with racks. I've seen people take those rack boxes and do awesome, they do all kinds of creative furnishing inside and turn them into really cool things. It's not just newspaper, a bowl, and a hide box. So it's more about just spending time thinking about the animal, its habits, and what can I do to add some sort of improvement without, that's within your budget and without hindering the animal in any way. And you'd be surprised that if you got creative enough, the stuff you can come up with. I'm always changing things here. Like I'm redoing all of the skink, the blue tongue hiding areas now. So we initially had these black tubes, but now we're doing something different. And so if I see this works, then I'll be like, okay, this is way better than the tubes, and it's more secure, and it offers a duality of cool in the summer and hot in the winter. So that, and we're always thinking about stuff like that. But for indoor keeping on the blue tongues, I would say that there's enough evidence on both sides that it both doesn't matter and does matter. As confusing as that is. It's kind of like,
you, Ron.
Well, but see, that's the good part about all this, right? So because that most of it is that way, that there is a massive amount of improvement that everybody can do. Yeah. I mean, we're nowhere near the pinnacle of what this industry could potentially be, or this hobby. We're in the infancy of it. We've got a long way to go.
So oh my God. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. Just still the amount of stuff that people argue about it's crazy. And none of it should be an argument. It should be an open discussion and finding what works best for you and for the animal.
That's it.
But with the blue tongues, they're outside year round, right? And so in the winter, are they still feeding, or do they just burrow down and go into like a brumation?
Most of them go off feed, but they come out on warm days. So not all of them, but a lot of them will come out on warm days. So we'll see them briefly. They'll come out, they'll bask a little bit. Maybe they'll drink a little water and they'll disappear. I know that if she sees them out for, like this year, it was really warm winter. Like we hardly had any cold. Yeah, so if she would, so if she sees them out for, a few days in a row, she'll sometimes offer them food. Sometimes they eat, sometimes they don't. Our blue tongues, though, also have in Florida, I don't know if you've seen them, but we have these large burrowing wood roaches that are like all over the place. Maybe not so much where you're at, but up here in Orlando and Kissimmee, they're everywhere. And I didn't.
So these aren't palmetto bugs.
No, this is a burrowing wood roach. And so when I did her first blue tongue enclosures, we bought these black tubs, and I ripped the bottoms out. Normally I put 1/4-inch wire on the bottom, but I was kind of lazy, and I figured, well, the blue tongues, they don't really need 1/4-inch wire because they're big. And I had all this PVC lattice with like 1-inch sections, 1-inch holes in this lattice. And so I thought, this is easy. I'll just cut this stuff really quick with a circular saw, and then just a couple screws, and I'm screwing it to the bottom, and then I'm done. I don't have to mess around with rolls of wire and getting all cut up. And so I did that, and then I backfilled them with leaves and sand, and then put the skinks in with all the furniture, that we put in there. Then about 6 months goes by, maybe a year. We notice the skinks are really robust, but every time we feed them, they're not really eating that much. And she thought that I was coming around behind her and feeding them. And I thought that, that she was just keeping them fed and didn't really think about it. And then one day we went in there to check on one and we pulled out the tube and dumped them out. And all these big roaches fell out of it. And the blue tongues just gorged, were running around chasing them. Then we realized these things aren't eating because they're eating these roaches that are living in their enclosures, because I put this 1-inch lattice on the bottom that they can just come right up in anytime and the cages were the enclosures were absolutely full of wood roaches.
Wow.
So all of them are like that now, and the skinks gorge on them whenever they see them. So they're getting a lot of wild stuff like that. Brown anoles get in there. They probably eat those. Most of the other lizard species that we've kept outside eats brown anoles when they get in there. And there are brown anoles everywhere. So they get some wild stuff too, quite a bit. And so I don't remember what we were. Dude, I totally lost train on that one.
Keeping them outside if they brumate during the winter, if they go off heat.
Oh yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. So I'm sure they're eating those roaches during the winter, because the roaches really like to be in the same hiding areas that the skinks are in the wintertime. Like you flip those things over and there's tons of roaches in there. So they're getting roaches that way.
Wow.
For sure. And so they maintain their weight pretty good.
That's awesome. You almost don't even have to feed them.
Yeah. I mean, we still need to feed them, but yeah, I mean, honestly, we could, there's certain times of the year where they probably don't eat much, because they're really getting a lot of that stuff. They just don't lose weight. They stay kind of right where they need to be.
How many blue tongues are in? Well, okay. I have two questions. What size cage are they in? And then how many blue tongues go in each cage?
It depends. So we have different sizes we've been playing around with. Like on the big end, the Western blue tongues, the Taliqua occipitalis, those are in, for the time being, they're in a 16-foot by 4-foot by 2.5 foot tall enclosure that used to have a trio of, forget the Spencer's monitor. So it was a pretty big lizard. It was a pretty big enclosure. When I got rid of the Spencers, I put the occipitalis in there, mostly because I didn't have anything else to put in that enclosure. And I thought, I want to make damn sure these breed. So I'm going to give these things this massive thing with all these crazy opportunities and see what happens. And it looks like it worked, because the female, her legs barely touch the ground. She's so gravid. It's I can't wait. I go out there 3 times a day to look for babies, because that's a lizard that I have always wanted to produce. It's one of the few things that I had left that I had not done yet. And so pretty stoked about that. Keeping every damn baby.
Do they, so they don't lay eggs?
Nope. They have live babies. And that's one of the best things about blue tongues, man.
That is so cool.
You set them up in pairs or trios, in decent size enclosures. They don't need to be huge. A lot of them are in pairs in 5 foot by 30 inches by 18 inches tall. Basically these aquaculture tubs that I rip the bottoms out. We keep a pair in each one of those. And once they're set up and they have everything they need in there, climbing areas and hiding areas and all that, then you just add food, make sure they have water, and then you collect babies once a year. It's really nice. No eggs to deal with. The babies are huge. You don't have to worry about feeding them bugs, because they eat basically a lot of their food comes straight from the grocery store. They are a herpetocultural success story waiting to happen. And when I say that, they already are, but I mean on a broad scale. And so Brian Barjack believed that about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. He had said it a lot. It kind of caused a boom in the skink thing, but then nobody ever seemed to really get the morphs to market. They seemed to languish around the country. And then a few years ago, we were able to get a large group of different morphs from someone that had them just sitting there. And it was kind of a collection. And he was like, hey, do you guys want to take it and try to breed these things and give me half? So I took them on loan, and within 3 years, we have it up and running. So, so that's going to change a lot because now albinos are available for, we're making them available for the first time this year. Then we have other mutations that are coming down the line. We're going to we've already started work on combos, and we'll have more combos. And eventually, you're looking at these kind of the things that are done by Joe Ball and Roger Kramer down in Australia, where you'll have all these weird 3, 4, 5 gene crazy combo blue tongues. And I think it's going to explode. And I'm betting everything on it, actually. So they're just everything about them is they're very, very fun to work with. So, I mean, I really like not having to deal with eggs. I like it. One of the most fun things that Heather and I do is she'll come in, she'll like, let's go look for babies. So we go out and we walk and we look for babies. It's like kind of like adult Easter egg hunting, and when you're walking by an enclosure and you see an albino baby sitting there, it's just amazing.
How big are the babies about?
They're probably, I would say maybe 4 inches, maybe 4 or 5 inches, but they're, blue tongues are they're big. So it's a heavy bodied, wow. It's mostly body, and they're basically big enough to eat an adult cricket right when they're born. Some of them are big enough to eat superworms right when they're born. So because we've seen them do it because there are superworms in the enclosures, and sometimes you'll see when the babies are born, like literally the same right away, they're over there slamming down a superworm. So they're an amazing animal, and there's a lot of different species. There's morphs, there's all this stuff. So there's a lot of ways you can go with this. And like I said, personally, I like live bearers. That's one of the reasons why emerald tree boas are so appealing to me. They're more appealing than chondros, because chondros, you got to deal with the eggs, and then you got to deal with the babies, and the babies are really small. Emerald babies are big. Emerald babies tend to eat rodents right out of the gate. Chondro babies are lizard eaters, so that's what they want. And we're a lizard farm, so we can supply them with all the lizards that we need. But I don't know
what kind of lizard would you start a chondro on?
Most likely house geckos.
Okay.
I mean, if you think about a baby chondro, it looks like a flower, and most geckos eat nectar. And I guarantee you that the reason they look that way is so they attract geckos in their countries of origin that come up to thinking they're going to get a flower, and instead they get fangs to the face.
Damn, that makes sense.
So if you think about them, that's why they don't feed on rodents, because where the hell are they going to find a pinky? There's no pinkies walking around the forest, but there are a hell of a lot of geckos in the areas they come from. So, and I mean, I could go out on my back porch right now in that window behind me, and I guarantee you there's 10 house geckos hanging out there, and you can put traps out and get a number. And a lot of people, they're like, oh, you can't feed them wild caught lizards, you're going to give them parasites. Well, actually, that's not exactly true. Those lizards that are out, if you go out in any backyard, you got diseased, dying, parasite-ridden reptiles running all over your yard. The lizards out there look pretty damn good because they're really healthy. And after 40 years of keeping animals outside that eat every lizard that finds its way in there, and trust me, brown anoles and geckos find their way in all these enclosures, and they get eaten by all kinds of stuff. I don't have parasite problems. So it's just one of those things. It's just like there's all these things that are in our heads that are not logical if you actually deconstruct them. Yeah, there's a risk that potentially you might feed one snake, one lizard that might give it pinworms, and this is a common thing with people that feed insectivorous stuff, right? They don't want to feed them wild bugs because the bugs are diseased. Well, let me tell you something. The crickets that you buy oftentimes are just as loaded as anything that you get in the wild. And I've had way more problems with commercially produced insects than I have with anything getting in there from the outside. So,
do you produce your own rodents?
No, I don't. We don't produce any of the feeders because it's just the two of us. The amount of dedication, the amount of time that would end up being spent on the feeders would take away from, so we would have to produce less reptiles, and neither one of us really enjoys the idea of producing our own roaches or rodents or any of that stuff. I've tried it. I actually spent thousands of dollars setting up my own cricket building one time, like back in 2006. And I spent about 4 or 5 weeks in it and then said, the hell with this. This sucks, and sold it all. So ever since then, I was just like, that's one of those, that's like having employees, you're kind of like, instead of having employees, we're just farming out stuff like that.
That makes sense.
That's
so the chondros and the emeralds, do they have water bowls in their enclosures?
Mm-hmm.
How often do those get changed out?
So they're basically they have 4, each enclosure has 4 8-ounce deli cups in different areas, suspended in trees that I basically keep full of water. When they get dirty, they get a little algae on them, I'll throw them out. And that's just, I don't think that's even necessary. But I do have that. And then in the enclosures that have the water basin, the sinks on the bottom, one sink is kept with about 4 inches of water at all times. It has plants in the water that help filter, that help keep it clean. I let tannins build up in there. If the animal defecates in that side, then I just drain it and clean it out and refill it. Otherwise, there's pretty much standing water there all the time, but it's not actually standing water because every day it either rains, or if it doesn't rain, then I artificially rain on them for an hour and it overflows the water. So I'm constantly refreshing the water. So they're always getting fresh water. That's one of the most important things, I think, with both of those species, is that they always need lots of fresh water. Now in the chondros, because they don't have the bottom, what I did was I took a 5-gallon bucket, filled it up with water, and put those, again, water plants that filter the water to keep it clean. And then that also is set up in a way where it constantly overflows. So there's always new water being added. And in those enclosures, they also have 4 suspended 8-ounce deli cups in different areas.
Have you seen them go down to the buckets or the bottom of the sinks and drink water?
I've never seen one drink water out of any of that, but I have seen them, like, when it's like a couple different times I saw a chondro like soaking itself in the water. And I don't think I've ever seen an emerald do that. I have the only time I see them drinking is when it rains, and then they drink the water. They like hold their heads up and they drink droplets off the sides of the enclosure. A lot of them will stay coiled and drink the droplets that are collecting on their coils. Because if you think about the way both of those snakes sit, right, that they sit in a way that funnels water to their mouth. And that's probably how they mostly get their water in the wild. They're sitting out in the ends of branches where they catch the rainwater or the dew, and it funnels it to their mouth and they lap it up. That's what they naturally do. So I found that they don't do it immediately. So it takes about 10 minutes of rain before they start doing it. And then they'll generally do it for about an hour. They spend a long time. When I see that they're no longer doing that, and then they've retreated to either into a cork log or to a different side of the enclosure, then I shut the water off.
Wow. So I want to keep chondros outside so bad right now.
You can totally do it. I've had 0 issues with the chondros. Like I said, the only thing I would say is in the wintertime, make sure you get them in, keep them, to keep them warm.
So you're just bringing them into your building?
Yeah. Okay. So they're just on these rolling carts, man. So, but we get a lot of days where you don't have to bring them in at all. And, one of the good points about the winter is that we get a lot of dewy nights in the wintertime because we get so warm in the daytime, and then it drops in the 60s and it spikes, and then we get dew. And they really like that. They take advantage of it. They most likely, chameleons will get a lot of their water from water vapor from inhaling it. And I suspect that that's probably true of most arboreals, including both of these snakes. So they're getting the water vapor that way. Keeping them outside really, in Florida really does. Now, the one thing I have found is that it seems like the best way to get sunlight to them is dappled sunlight. So I kind of have them positioned under trees they get like rays where they can pick. In the summertime anyway. In the wintertime, they like full sun exposure. So then I have them kind of out, more in the open.
So you move them around depending on what time of year it is?
Yeah. Yeah, the carts allow me to pretty much move them wherever the hell I need to. And I've got, I can get them under complete trees if I want to. I can get them right on the edges of the trees. I can get them, fully exposed. So it's
What? Oh man, I've got so many cool ideas going through my head right now. So what is the cutoff for the cold weather when they come in? Well, like what and are they out during the day and then it's just at night,
Yeah.
and okay, so all year round they're out during the day.
Unless it's one of those unusually cold days, yeah. So
Okay.
as long as the temperature is around 70 degrees or higher, they're outside. At nighttime, I will only roll them in if it's going to be below 59. And honestly, I accidentally left them out 1 or 2 nights when we were out of town and didn't get home until late. They were exposed to the low 50s. It did nothing. Like they didn't care.
Wow.
So I don't know. Long-term exposure, that's a different story. I'm not personally willing to chance it. Although when I look at the data from where they're from, they most likely can take 50s at night, no problem, as long as they can get, heated up during the daytime. And really, that's the important thing. So the important thing is if they get cool at night, they got to be able to get warm back during the daytime. And there's a variety of ways you can do that outdoors. We use 6 mil clear plastic wrapping enclosures that way. Now, I wouldn't dare do that for those snakes, because for lizards, if they get 110 degrees underneath that plastic, for the species that we keep, they don't care, especially since they can go down underneath their subfloor. And even if the air temperature near where the plastic is like 100, 110 degrees, it's still going to be like in the 70s down underneath the subfloor, 80s, depending on the time of year. We don't ever allow them to get that way. But like, just say something happened, where we didn't vent them before like 11 a.m. and the temperature rocket up, and then we went out there and said, oh, we forgot and we had to vent them. They would be fine. But the emeralds, I think, and the condors, you might kill them. So I wouldn't do the plastic. The plastic is a risky thing, but I've been doing it for 40 years. I've never, ever killed anything under it. But that's also because I'm here all the time. And now Heather and I are together, and she's here. We're both here. We're both very, that's like our number one priority in the wintertime is get up in the morning, watch the temperatures. When the temperature gets to be about 60 degrees, so say if it was 32 the night before and the plastic is covered in ice, which has happened plenty of times, we'll wait till it hits 60, and then we'll go out, we'll vent it like 4 inches, and so that any hot air can rush out. And then depending on how warm it gets during the day, we'll either continue to roll it further and expose more of it and let out hot air faster, or if it stays 60 or 65, sometimes we'll leave it at just a couple inches. So there's all these, it's a hard thing to, the tweaks of this is hard to kind of put into context because it's very variable. Like it changes by the day. I've had to become my own weatherman. I've had to really learn. I know more about weather, probably as much about weather as I do reptiles at this point, because I've had to really learn all this stuff, because the two things are completely locked together. But that's only if you do it like on a scale. If you just got a couple of enclosures, it's much simpler. But we do this for a living. It's all done on some sort of a small commercial scale. So the bigger you get, the more complicated it gets.
Yeah.
And it's also dependent on species and a bunch of other things. But dude, you can honestly, if I were you, kind of just copy the pictures of the thing that we have. We use the 1-inch aluminum framing. It's super simple. You can get the little 3D printed connectors, snap them together, and make whatever frame you want. Use vinyl coated 1/4-inch wire and wire it out, nicely. And you can get them outside. Put 1-inch lattice on the roof to create a dappled sunlight effect. Basically like being under a tree,
Yeah.
And then you can push it around, or not. Well, if you put it on wheels, if it was me and I only had a couple, I would absolutely, wheels are the best way to go. And honestly, if you could get them on wheels and get them up to where the top of the enclosure was about 7 or 8 feet in the air, then you're really, really golden, because now you're given that. Now they can get the security they want. They can always feel like they're way above everything else, that they're safe. It does make a difference. I've noticed a marked difference in the behaviors that I see once I got them up high, of the emeralds that I put high, as opposed to the ones that are still like down on the ground where they can only get about 5.5 feet. They act differently. You can tell they're just, it's hard to describe, but it's a difference.
Like a confidence, or like decreased stress.
They're secure. Yeah. You can tell they're secure. They're like, I don't have to worry about you. You're way down there.
That's so cool.
So
now what are you putting in there for added security? Are you putting in live potted plants, or like how are they able to? Okay, so what kind of plants are you putting in there?
For them, I use 3 different things. I use Dracaena, which is variegated Dracaena. I can't remember. It's like a very common is Schefflera.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, very
Hawaiian
common.
Schefflera.
Yeah, very common houseplant. We use a lot of those. I use Eureka palms, another cheap, kind of a fan type leaf on it, provides nice security. And then I also use mass cane, which is kind of a throw. I never intended the mass cane for them. The mass cane was a plant that we use for the giant anoles because it has a perfect stalk and they like to lay their eggs in it. And it's a super cheap plant that you can rip out of a pot every week and check for an egg and put it back in and it doesn't die. So so I have a lot of them in a lot of those enclosures too, because I had so damn many of them from when I was commercially producing anoles. And I found that they actually, so if I put the mass cane plant in there and I drape the leaves over these, we use grapevines for the perches. I initially did PVC perches, and then I was like, I have a yard full of, I have 5 acres, and the whole 5 acres is surrounded by grapevine of all these different sizes. So I started going out there and cutting like 10 and 12 foot sections of that down and then rolling it up and stuffing it into the enclosure. And I would do a few of those. And what it does is it creates these loops of varying, orientations and varying thicknesses. And then I put the plants across the thing and kind of drape the leaves all into the grapevine. And man, that has been the best thing. The combination of the grapevine and the potted plants, it looks kind of cool. It's obviously, it's not like, we're kind of in the line between like a natural setup and a commercial setup. Like we can't, because we have so many animals and we have so many enclosures to manage, we can't go full like super naturalistic, because then we'll have too many problems getting eggs or finding babies or all the things that go with that. So we kind of straddle the line between the two things. Like it's between a minimalistic kind of commercial setup, but rather than do that, we supply everything the animals need down to pretty finite details, but it's also simple to manage. It has to be simple to manage. So that's where that comes in great. And grapevine is all over the place. So, and it lasts forever. Like some of that is 6 or 8 months old. It's not even, there's no signs of rot. Like it's super durable. And the snakes really can grip it. So,
I've got tons of that around me too. The muscadine. Yeah. It's everywhere.
Yeah. They're the perfect size too. Like you can get them like almost, you cut down a 12-foot piece, you're going to get the range from like maybe, a quarter inch at the end. And as it gets thicker, and when you make that roll, now they can choose if they want a 1 inch thickness, if they want a quarter inch thickness, if they want, you know what I'm saying? And so it's worked super well. So yeah, so that's basically how we outfit the furnishing wise. It's a few potted plants. It's a lot of grapevine. And I think that's it, other than the lattice on the roof for dappled sunlight effect.
Which you could go without if it's under like a big oak tree or something.
Correct.
Like that.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I do have. So right now I moved them recently to underneath. We have these huge oak trees, and I moved them underneath that to spread them out because it's been super hot. So I wanted to kind of give them more, try to mitigate some of that. We had days here where it was 100 degrees already this year. So I was like, well, that doesn't bode well for the rest of summer. I bet you in August we're going to hit, triple digits fairly often. So I was like, maybe, and that's carts get super hot, right? They're those metal carts that when you go to Home Depot and they've been sitting in that parking lot for a while and you touch them, they burn the shit out of you. So that's what we use. We have like 15 of those. But they basically turn into a radiant heat panel in the summer. So I was like, okay, I'm going to get the emeralds off those and put them out underneath these oak trees. And I've been able to remove the dappled, the grate on the lattice cover.
Yeah.
So that's yeah. And they're all positioned.
Do you cohat, like how many snakes are in each cage? It's just one snake per cage?
No, I actually had most of them in pairs. Almost all of them are in pairs. So when you get them, when the enclosure's that big, I have this one that we called the Notochondro. It's basically a pixel emerald tree boa. There have been a handful of them found over the years. They're most likely a morph that will prove out. They're extremely rare. We paid a metric fortune for the damn thing. And so I'm just very committed to making sure that nothing happens to that thing. Now, I did pair it up for a little while. And then when we started having problems, I split everybody up and kind of separate them because I just did not want anything to happen to anything. Until I know exactly what's going on. So there's some of them that are kept singly now. There are some that are kept in pairs. So it's kind of both. I've actually seen no difference as far as between the ones that are singly and the one that are in pairs. Mm-hmm. And mostly the reason the ones that are kept singly, they're kept singly only because it's just easier to feed them that way. Mm-hmm. I don't have to worry about standing there waiting for them to get it down so that one doesn't finish first and then go start on the other end of, a rodent and then end up being an issue where one swallows the other one's head and stuff like that. So
are the chondros paired up as well?
Yeah, they're those 100% of those are paired up.
Nice.
Like, I'm not going to separate those. We just have a couple pairs of Arus and a couple pairs of Beox.
So you're into the localities with the chondro?
Not really. I honestly, localities really don't mean a hell of a lot to me, to be perfectly honest. I just, whatever's cool, man. It's just, I've seen really amazing locality stuff and I've seen really amazing designer stuff. I kind of like it all. I appreciate it all. Mm-hmm. So I don't really fall into either one of those camps. I would never cross an occipitalis into anything else because that thing's amazing the way it is. But I can absolutely see why people have done like designer chondros with the crosses. Some of those are just astounding. Mm-hmm. And then there's also like really amazing, locality stuff. Those are cool too. I dig it all. So with the chondros, not really something I really care about. I like them. Not enough to make it like a central thing for us. And honestly, it's another one of the selling points of the emerald tree boas for me is that I don't have to worry about localities and all that stuff. It's like it's an emerald tree, but if it's a northern emerald, it's a northern emerald, it's a northern emerald. So
yeah, at
least at this time.
I just like the chondros, but it doesn't. From everything I'm hearing, they terrify me in some respects because it seems like they're so finicky and they die so easily. But it sounds like you're doing great with them, just keeping them outside.
Yeah, I haven't seen that with them at all. Like they're super aggressive feeders. Honestly, I think a lot of they're very hydration. Again, you have to think about it. The hydration game that we run over here is substantially. I don't think there's anyone else that does this. I don't think anybody has an outdoor, essentially full rain system where you can simulate. When you stand underneath that thing and I fire it up, it feels like it's raining. So, and both of those snakes are clearly very much tied to hydration. Is very important for them. It is for all arboreals, regardless of species. Like all of those things, that's always been the Achilles heel of most of them. If you let them dry out, it'll kill them. And they tend to be in captivity. There's trying to think of how to phrase this, but a lot of our our current state of enclosures for them are probably not adequate, right? So I mean, we've really figured out, like, the ball python thing has been worked out because an entire industry in the 90s got together and said, basically focused all of its best and brightest onto the problem of, because ball pythons used to be considered unbreedable and they were a trash snake, is what people thought. Like, they don't eat, they're cheap, they suck, whatever. And I mean, that's how it was pre like 93. Prior to that, though, when the first albinos came in, the first pieds were found, that was like in the late 80s, and that really started to change that view of them. And by the mid 90s, there were a lot of people on board. By the mid 90s, you have Nerd coming in, you have Graziani paying attention, doing it. You have all these people. Like, there's so many names that I can't even remember them all. But and it just kept spreading.
What is your preferred food item for your snakes?
Well, I mean, it's just the regular rats that I can get. I mean, they're commercially available, easy to get. I don't think there's really any difference between those and, chicks or quail or anything else, at least not for the species that I keep. And we know that the emerald tree boa primarily feeds on the spiny rat. That's the thing that it eats. And I'm sure adult chondros, I mean, they very much know what a rat is. And that's, small mammals are probably a large. I think both of these snakes are mammal eaters for the most part. I think the whole idea that they eat birds is kind of another antiquated thought process, because they live in a tree, they must eat birds, but they hunt at night and they all go to descend to the ground to hunt. So come again, how they're looking for birds? They're down on the ground because they're looking for rodents. They all do it too. Both species do that. So they're down there looking for rats and stuff to walk underneath the branches, and then they pop them. So when
you go out at night, what do you see? Do you ever go out there and look at them to see what their behavior is?
All the time. And when they're hungry, they're face down 6 to 10 inches above the bottom of the enclosure, waiting for food. And then I know they're hungry. And when they're not, they're coiled up in the branches. A lot of times at night, they're out. They're almost all actually out cruising at night. Like, they're all over the place. And yeah, they're I go out in rainstorms a lot. They're super active during that. Rainstorms at night really seem to trigger them too. They get like super active. So that's another benefit to having them outdoors, right? They get to experience, actual rainstorms, and it does, man, rainstorms have a profound impact on everything here. Like, everything looks better the day after a big storm. Right? As they're really getting hydrated, no matter what it is, blue tongue, spiny tail iguana, emerald tree boa, all of it. It all looks way, way better after a big rainstorm. And that's just because they're getting an extra helping of hydration on top of what they already have. And so that's something we practice a lot. Hydration is largely ignored. Like, people think a water bowl is enough, but it's definitely not enough. It's probably enough to keep them alive. It's probably enough to even get some reproduction. But is it really enough? Because all these things are designed to take advantage of rain events. Rain events are just like, they're overflowing the cup rather than just, trying to fill it up. So they basically super hydrate them, and everything is just better. We put a lot of emphasis on hydration here. That's a big thing. And I think that's also one of the reasons why we've been so successful with so many species. Like, it's probably what I personally, I consider it way more important than food. because it's the most basic and thing that they need. And it's also kind of difficult in a lot of ways to just get it in, especially an animal that's built to take advantage of rain. It's built to take advantage of dew. So
How often are you,
we can improve.
how often are you feeding them? Or are you just going off of the cues that they're giving you?
Yeah, I don't do any. So we do no, that's another thing we do. We do a lot of intentional randomness. Whether it's lizards or snakes, we don't do any kind of set times. Sometimes they'll get meals, not in the case of snakes, but let's just say for lizards, sometimes they'll get meals 3 days in a row. Then they might go 2 days without anything. Then they might get another meal. Then they might wait 3 days to get another one, or they might get around for 5 days straight of food. So we keep it very variable because that's much more natural than, oh, this big hairless monkey shows up every day at 1 o'clock and gives me a plate of food. So we use seasonal feedings, like for the animals. Like we do not, let's just take, like right now we're getting some kind of melon. I don't know. I think it's honeydew melon. So when those are around, they're in season, we use them a lot for the time that they're in season. And then when they're out of season, we switch to something else. So we always switching it around, never the same. There's no kind of routine. It's total chaos. And with the snakes, sometimes like the emerald tree boas, I'm careful with because, like I said, they have all these issues. But I'm probably feeding them about once every 3 to 4 weeks, and then, but I have done it every 2 weeks, and then I've kind of switched it up. The chondros, they get fed whenever the hell I feel like it. So sometimes it's every 10 days they'll get a meal, and sometimes they'll wait 3 or 4 weeks and get a meal. And it's intentionally chaotic, and because when we want to prep them for breeding, then we add a super dose of consistency, which gives them every species we work with. It gives them abundance of nutrients and abundance of fat, and then most of the time it will trigger the reproductive process. So we do that with everything. Like that's just how we operate. And then in the wintertime, a lot of stuff doesn't eat for 3 or 4 months, and that's how you keep things from getting obese. You can build up a lot of fat on them previous to that by feeding them really well, and then they go through their 3 or 4 month brumation, and when most of our stuff comes out of it's where it should be. It's like lean but healthy, and good fat at the base of the tail, and you chunk them back out with some reliable food supply, and then you get reproduction. And it's
how is it? How do you keep the bearded dragons? Like, what size enclosure are they in, and how do they fare with the rain and the humidity and not being kept really arid?
That is a very common question, and they do extremely well. They don't care about humidity is a non-issue. As long so the humidity thing comes again from inadequate indoor caging. So if you have high humidity and you don't have good ventilation, well, you're going to have a problem. But our enclosures are outdoors. They're well ventilated. The air humidity here is nothing. Periods of rain are really nothing. It's actually beneficial. They drink a lot. They look better. They're not as arid as people think they are. They have a large range, and part of their range is more like xeric habitat. It's kind of like Central Florida in a lot of regards. They're not this like, I think the common hobby way of thinking about a bearded dragon is this kind of like hardcore desert lizard. It's just sitting in the sand on the ground. That's not true. They're mostly in trees, up to like, it seems like they prefer to be about 4 to 6 feet off the ground. Wow. They're semi-arboreal. They're very arboreal as babies. This is why you see nipping so much. If you go to a lot of pet stores, you'll see a lot of babies nipped because they put them in enclosures where they have nothing to climb on. It causes the babies to freak out, and it's like a nervous tick, and they start nipping each other. And what that is that's a stress response from wanting to get up on things and not allowing them to do that. So I defeated that personally back in 2013 when I realized, because I used to have a nip problem. And back in 2013, I was producing like almost 10,000 baby bearded dragons a year for the pet industry. And I would lose about, in sales, about 10% of them were basically animals I had to give away every year because they were nipped. And so I worked on the problem for a while. And one day it just occurred to me, I was thumbing through a travel magazine and I saw a picture of baby bearded dragons along a fence line in Australia on a cattle ranch. They were all over the tops of these little bushes that were on the ground. And I was like, that's it. They're 100% semi-arboreal. We're denying them that ability. And so we're causing a stress response, which is the nipping. And I started adding these things I call tumbleweeds, which is basically I take a whole bunch of oak, you know how spiny oak branches are. They've got all these little sticks attached to them. So I make these clumps of oak branches and put them in the enclosures, and it all went away and we never saw nips again. On very rare occasions do you get one that does it.
Wow.
So, so they need to climb. We use a lot of sticks. We use 4x4. They're 4 foot by 4 foot by 2.5 foot tall enclosures that have a subfloor for them to hide in, have a lot of branches. They have shelving on them so they can climb up the branches, get on the shelves. It allows them to bask at full sun whenever they want. The sun is always hitting the top, the highest shelf, as long as the sun is in the sky. So they can always get to that. If they want to, they can drop down a shelf or two, and then it's partial shade and partial sun, so they can control it that way. It's all about giving them options. The only time we really have to worry about rain events is during the spring and the fall when the weather is not that hot. And we get that, you know how we'll get those cold fronts that'll stall out over us for a week at a time. And it'll just be like 65 or 75 degrees, but it's cloudy and it's just kind of misty rain. That will give them respiratory infections. So the remedy for that is the 6 mil plastic over the enclosures, which doesn't allow that mist to get to them. So it keeps them dry, and it also raises the temperature by about 10 degrees underneath, even when it's cloudy. And so completely subvertible by doing that. And that's how we can keep them outside year round. And I've been keeping bearded dragons outside on a scale since 1986. And Heather used to be an indoor keeper. And then when we got together in 2016, I showed her what I was doing and how I was doing it. And she initially was very reluctant because she had heard all the same things. Oh, you can't keep them outside in Florida. Oh, it's too wet. I'm like, that's not how it works. And then it took her about a year to really get used to it, because she would freak out every time there was a change in the weather initially. And then once she saw that, oh man, they're really doing good. Now she doesn't want to keep them any other way, because now she can go in the enclosures with them, interact with them, and it's way more enjoyable to watch, these big adult dragons. And we keep them in pairs or trios in those enclosures. And, they do all the things that dragons are supposed to do. They run around, they head bob, they, aggressively attack their food when you throw it in there. Or if a brown anole makes it in there, it's toast. Like all you see is dragon flying through the air. Yeah, I mean, Florida is not dragon unfriendly. It's just that I mean, even I believe this for a while, that they were a desert lizard. And I figured I was kind of tempting fate initially when I started in 86, keeping them outside. And then over time, by about 90 or 91, I realized, oh hell, these things, man, they do great here. As long as you compensate. Again, it's the spring and the fall where the risk comes. And it's only during those events where in Florida we get kind of like, it becomes Seattle for a week. And that's where the problem is. But the actual cold, like I've had mine get down in the low 20s. I mean, granted, they were in an underground box at the time, but it was still very cold in that box. No effect at all. And where they come from, it does get freezing. So they're biologically set for that.
I have gotten really into Argentine boas, and I want to learn more about. I absolutely love them, and the more I research their habitat, the more intrigued I am by the animal. you know, and I'm sure you experience that where it's, you know, you research the habitat, and if they have a cool background, it makes the animal that much cooler, you know, where it's like, oh man, it, you know, it gets really cold in Argentina, and, you know,
they're from the same place as the tegus, man. Tegus don't give a shit about the cold.
Yeah.
I've actually bred Argentines outside in Miami when I was a kid. Well, when I was in my 20s in the 90s, I did it a couple times. One of my favorite snakes, period, and amazingly well suited for this environment. Just make damn sure those things never get away. But yeah, they're perfect for that, actually. That I can't. There is probably no better boa that comes to mind for outdoors here than that. Those things they have everything they need. They will.
Can you walk me through how you kept them outside?
Okay, well, this is in Miami, and this was this was like early in my career before I really, you know, I've learned a lot since then. Like I've never.
So maybe how would you do it now then? How, if you were to get a group of Argentine boas, how would you do it now?
Well, they get pretty big, so I would probably build a 4 foot by 16 foot, which is kind of my preferred, because you can buy these 16 foot, 12 inch by 2 inch by 16 foot long planks at Home Depot. They're pressure treated and they're super durable. They last a long time, so they're very much worth. You know, they're kind of pricey. They're like $50 a piece, I think, the last time I priced them, but they'll last forever. And the good thing about them is they're super straight, they're super strong, and I would do an enclosure, maybe 4 of those high, you know, so kind of like 16 by 4 foot wide by 4 foot high. So you got some height to them, maybe even higher. One end of the enclosure would basically be an underground den. So an entire 4 by 4 foot section where they could all, however many you had in there, I would assume like you're talking about 2 or 3. 16 foot would also give even the biggest adults plenty of room, you know, and if you furnish it right, you know, and you add large branches and stuff for them to climb on and hide under and all that, you could add a ton of real estate, usable real estate to enclosures like that. So, I mean, that's, if I were going to do them today, that's exactly what I would do. And they would basically be like that. I'd backfill it with, I'd probably use cypress mulch in the case of the boas, although we use the sand that's on the property. So like, I don't buy substrate. As a matter of fact, I dug such a massive hole that you can see it from space, from taking the sand out of this one particular area and backfilling all the enclosures with it. So because the sand on the property, we always intentionally pick properties that have, you know, that white Florida sand that's kind of in the interior. Well, that's all on what's called the Lake Wales Ridge. And I always try to stay somewhere near that thing because I want to take advantage of the drain. It drains. We don't flood, it drains. And that white sand is amazing for substrate. Like my buddy Eddie Soto is another lizard breeder, will routinely come over here with buckets and load up on sand to take home for his own projects. So the sand here is just, it's not, if I was in like where, you know, most of Florida is like mud where it's like black dirt, I don't think I'd use that for anything. So I'm lucky in that regard. I also, when we live places, we try to pick for that. That's one of the criteria anyway that we have. It needs to be on the ridge somewhere, which is a huge swath in you know, the interior of Florida. So you actually have like hundreds of miles you could choose from. So, but for those snakes, I would probably backfill it with cypress mulch. That's my go-to for anything that doesn't really need to be on sand. And the only reason I even say that is just for feeding them in the enclosures. You know, if you're feeding them frozen thawed rats, you really don't want them eating a sand ball. Yeah. Whereas the mulch, even if it does get stuck to the rat, they usually work it out on their own. Their snakes usually can just push it right off, so they don't really ingest it. Obviously, you can also like make sure you feed them on top of like a section of it that doesn't have any kind of substrate at all. So that's the only consideration I would make there. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, You could have a nice group in an enclosure like that. I guarantee you that you will produce them every single year.
Hmm.
So, but because they're live bearers, you have to make damn sure that it's completely, baby tight. So that's another thing we do is all the enclosures here are baby tight. Like if something is born, we don't know about it. We get a surprise. Like we've had animals that we didn't think were gravid, especially with blue tongues. They don't look gravid. We thought they didn't go. And then all of a sudden there's 3 babies in the enclosure. So we kind of bake that in with all the live bearers. It better damn well be escape proof for the smallest thing that could be born there. But other than that, yeah. I mean, like I said, if it was me, I'd put 1.2, 2.4, massive enclosure. Just kind of let them do their thing. Everything we keep is either in pair. We don't really keep anything singly. We keep everything either in pairs or in groups, depending on the size of the enclosure.
Mm-hmm.
And year round, we don't separate. The only time we ever separate is if there's some sort of internal squabble that's not like immediately resolved. You can have lizards get into a little scrap and then they resolve it and then it's not an issue. But if you have one that's like over a course of a day or two habitually picking on a cage mate, then that's an issue. And then we'll separate them and then we'll try reintroducing them later. And most of the time that fixes that problem as well.
Who do you take out? The one that's picking on the other one or the one that's being bullied?
It kind of depends. It just depends on whichever one is actually easiest to grab. Because like I said, big enclosures, difficult to get like underneath subfloors. They would have to be completely removed, which requires tools in a lot of cases. So I don't want to tear them apart every time I have to do something. So we'll get whatever one is out and easiest to get.
I have 2 questions about the subfloors. How much, like percentage, how much space does it take up of the bottom of the cage?
It depends on the species, but in most cases it's about half.
Okay.
So on some things like the new ones that I'm doing for the blue tongues, I haven't started yet, but I will once it cools down a little bit because it's been brutal. The new ones will probably be about 65 to 75% of the bottom will be a subfloor. So they'll actually have 2 floors that they can pretty much use the whole thing. They're either on the top or underneath. So it doubles the floor real estate.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it twice as usable. So things like that, finding ways to fill that empty space. Most enclosures are full of empty space. And if you think about it, there's all kinds of ways that you can rig that up to get way more space out of a small spot.
Are you putting a layer of substrate over that subfloor?
The substrate's underneath it.
Okay.
So there's substrate, then there's a space, then there's the deck, the floor. Okay. And then in the wintertime, though, I do put unopened bags of cypress mulch on top of the subfloor, and that creates an insulating barrier. And they work like heat packs because it turns out that when the mulch is breaking down in those bags and they're sealed, they get hot. It gets hot. Then if you amplify that by putting it in the sun, it'll hold heat way after the sun goes down. So it's kind of been, it was an accident. It's another one of those things that happened by accident. I was just lazy and didn't want to dump the mulch out because every year I would have to go back in there afterwards and shovel it out. And one year I was like, you know what? Screw this. I'm not going to, there was like 70 enclosures. That's just what had to been done. Because by now we've expanded and I'm like, there's no way in hell I'm going to spend 2 months with a shovel trying to shovel all this crap out. So I'm like, let me see if this bagged version of this works. And initially we didn't know what to think. And then after like a couple months in, we went out there on a cold morning and we touched the bag and it was way warmer than the air. And I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. So we've used it ever since.
Wow.
Cheap way to insulate outdoor shit, man.
Yeah, for sure.
$2 a bag.
So, okay. So it now I know how much space it's taking up the subfloor. Shit, I had another question. I totally forgot what it was. Oh, so you said that it requires tools to remove the subfloor and everything. Do you ever have them lay eggs under there, or do you just let them lay their eggs, or do you collect the eggs and then incubate them, or are you letting them just do their thing and you get the babies?
Oh no, 100% of the eggs are collected.
Okay.
It's rare that they land at the subfloor because usually the subfloors have a very small layer of substrate, as opposed to every enclosure has, if it's an egg layer, it has a nesting area. So, and that's a deep layer of usually sand substrate, depending on what it is. Like I said, again, fortunately, there's enough organic matter in the sand that we have here naturally that it holds a burrow. I mean, our property is full of gopher tortoises, and they can't dig a burrow if the sand doesn't hold the burrow. So it works really well. So we just use that, and then all the egg layers have that. And then her and I, and particularly in the case of Heather, she will walk those enclosures every 30 minutes all day, every day. And she's out there looking for, is this dragon laying eggs? Is this blue tongue having babies? And she monitors everything that's going on. But every once in a while, we have had animals lay eggs underneath the subfloor, in which case I got to get out there with sometimes a crowbar and a drill gun and unscrew the boards and, take it all apart. And it's usually like a 30-minute ordeal. And then get at them and then put it back together. So it does have a downside, but it has such a significant upside that it's worth the effort, because it's at floor level, it's at ground level. It stays very cool and very warm, depending on the season. And no matter what weather event happens here, they have a safe place they can go. And that's the amount of security that provides to them and the peace of mind that it provides to us. It's probably one of the best additions I've ever added to an outdoor system. So, and then I'm constantly iterating on this stuff, man. Behind that 2,500 square foot building is a section of property I call the graveyard of failures. And it's all of these failed systems that I have attempted at and then did them and then said, oh, this sucks, and then ripped them apart and redid them. And so I'm always looking for ways to make this better, both for the animals and for us. And, it's about efficiency. It's about keeping them safe. It's about keeping them in. I don't want any situations where I'm responsible for anything that's, non-native introduced. So we have all these things that we do to make sure that none of that happens.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Have you had any issues with predation from native wildlife or invasive?
No. And so, I mean, so one of the funny things about this place is that, the first week we moved into this house, we were in bed one night and we heard this loud crash and jumped out of bed. I grabbed this fucking gun and flashlight, and I go out and I look, and our front window screen, which is strange because when we moved in this house, we noticed that all the window screens were gone. There was only a couple windows that had screens. Didn't really think much of it. Thought, they must have thrown them out for whatever. And here it is. One of the few that are on here is now lifted out and bent over. And that's what made that noise. So we checked the ring camera, and it recorded like this stream of it must have been 6 raccoons with 2 possums in a line walking around our house and trying to get in the windows. So that's how many, and that's just one example of we've seen foxes. We have coyotes on the property that we've seen. We've got, and then we have non-predators like deer, because we live in Orlando. We live inside this big city, but we're in a very small area that has a lot of 5-acre properties, and there's a lot of construction. So they keep bulldozing the natural areas, and they're forcing all the wildlife now into these little pockets. So there's a ton of them here, and we don't mess with them. So we just leave them alone. So all the enclosures are built though with that in mind. So that's why we use things like 16 gauge, 1/2-inch vinyl coated wire, or 14 gauge, I think it is 14 gauge 1/4 inch. But we always use pretty sturdy. Our enclosures are built to withstand a raccoon, a possum, the fox.
Yeah.
So that it's just a given. Honestly, though, I've never really had a problem at all. Like as a matter of fact, the probably the two things that would cause me the most problems can't do it. And one of them is an owl that has decided that emerald tree boas look tasty and is constantly hanging out around them, trying to get to them. And the other are these two hawks that live on the property, and we see them breeding all the time and stuff. So I know they have babies, but they sit over the bearded dragon enclosures and pray that we forget to, they can get in there one day. I mean, they're always on the lines above the dragon enclosures, or the skinks looking down. Sometimes they'll actually land on the top of the enclosures themselves and try to get in.
Wow.
But the raccoons and the possums and none of that seems to be like a non-issue, but that's also because they can't get into anything.
Do you see any bobcats?
I've never seen one of those here, but they had, I mean, I'm quite sure they are here because in the past, so I haven't seen a bobcat, but I did find a lemur in my yard.
What?
Yeah, big full-grown ring-tailed lemur. I guess it was about a year and a half, 2 years ago. Heather was at her parents or something, and I was home alone. It was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I went to let the dog out, and the bulldog froze at the end of the porch, and it's just staring at something. And I looked, and I thought it was our cat, and I was like, "Why is the cat on top of the enclosure like that?" And then it turned around. I didn't have my glasses on, so I couldn't see it clearly. And then it turned around, and it was a lemur. It stood up. The dog took off after it like an idiot, and the dog was chasing this lemur through the yard. It was, oh my God, it was crazy. And the scream that thing made, I have never heard a sound like that. So it hauled ass across the yard. It jumped into some trees, and then I thought it was gone, and I walked out to my driveway, and then it crossed my driveway, turned around, looked back at us again, and then ran across the street and jumped into the trees across the street. So it was somebody's pet, and I guess it was funny because the day that it showed up was a day that we had done a round of fruit with all of the animals out there. So I don't know and then I thought we've heard it a couple other times since. So I think that it just lives out here somewhere. Maybe there's four of them. I don't know. But yeah, that was pretty cool. But yeah, it was just sitting on top of the enclosures, just looking down in them.
It sucks how bad invasive animals are, but how cool they are at the same time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure those aren't breeding. I'm sure that's a single, I heard that either there was I know there are a lot of people in this area because there's a lot of it's all 5 acres properties. There's a lot of people that have different kinds. There's like horse people. And I've heard there's like a lady that has a bunch of monkeys that live right near here. And so there are other animal keepers out here for sure. But I mean, that thing could have been around a long time too. It might not be related to anybody here that's currently here,
Don't we have Reese's monkeys popular?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. In South Florida, I used to take people would come down, and I take them on herb trips. And then I would always take them out to this, we used to call them the French fry eating monkeys, because they were in this, like around these fast food places, and they would come to your car and beg for French fries. It's crazy. So many of them, man. So I would take people there to this, that would be one of the stops that I made when I would take them out herping, like people from other states. And I'd be like, watch this. And you pull into the back of like a McDonald's and aim park in a parking space that was aiming towards this mangrove area behind. And man, within a couple minutes of you parking there, the monkeys, they were like, oh, there's potential meal. And they would come right to the car. And
Are they still there?
Oh yeah. There's tons of them.
Wow.
Tons of them. And see, and those aren't from the pet trade. Those are from a place that called Pirates World. That was kind of this like kitschy tourist trap thing that was back in the 60s and 70s and 50s. That was in Dania, and they got away from them, or they, whatever. And that's how they got there. And they've been there ever since. They live in the mangroves. And now there's a ton of them.
Wow.
Like a ton.
There's a place that's further north too, isn't there?
I'm sure that I've heard that there are multiple places. That's just the one that and I've also seen monkeys in the Keys. Like, I don't know exactly what kind those were, but And that was like in the 70s when I saw those there. So I'm sure there are quite a bit of them.
I remember I'll have to look it up now. I remember somebody telling me that they had shot a movie. I forgot what the movie was, but
Oh
when they
yeah.
were done, they just let all the monkeys go because it was cheaper than having to bring them back to
So
Hollywood.
I think that's in Silver Springs.
Okay.
And that was where they used to shoot Tarzan.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's the Colony. Yeah. That's around Ocala area.
Mm-hmm.
And that was from where they used to shoot the Tarzan, either the TV show or the movies. I can't remember. But yeah, I've seen those too. I forgot about them. That's a cool place, actually. I mean, the springs are amazing. These giant alligators in crystal clear water just kind of doing their thing 10 feet deep and stuff like that. It's neat.
Damn.
Yeah, it's a neat place for sure.
Florida's a wild place.
Yeah, between the monkeys and the Florida man, I don't know what's worse.
You were born here?
Yeah, I'm from Miami.
Nice.
Yeah, I was born in Miami.
And what about your folks? Were they here too?
My mom's side of the family is from Philadelphia, but they moved to Miami in the 50s. My dad's from Maine, but he met my mom's brother in the service, and that's how he ended up in Florida. So
Nice.
My mom didn't want to move to Maine. My dad was cool with moving down here. So yeah, I grew up in northwestern North Miami, and yeah, I had all this crazy stuff in my backyard as a kid, and I was into reptiles since I was little, and so I went from catching little anoles to catching giant anoles to catching snakes. And
where can you find giant anoles now?
Oh, dude, your area is full of them.
I've never seen them
because you don't. So they're funny, man. They're so cryptic that they can be all around you and you won't even know it. But basically, the best time to see them is between about 10:30 a.m. and about noon on the trunks of large trees, and that's all. But that's dependent on the specific area too. I've noticed that if they never have a need to come to the trunk, you'll never even know they're there. They're always up in the crown. You'll never see them. When we moved into this property in Kissimmee, I had no idea there were night anoles here, but I was breeding night anoles. And once we set them up outside, all of a sudden we had wild night anoles trying to get into the enclosures. Males would just show up on the outside of the enclosures trying to get in. And then I realized, Heather and I had gone to Animal Kingdom out at Disney, and we were standing in line. It was on a hot day, and right in front of me, and it was a huge night anole just sitting right there on a palm tree. And I pointed it out, and then all the tourists, no one saw it until I pointed it out. And then everybody around me was like, "Oh, look at that!" And they were all the tourists were pointing at it. They're incredibly cryptic, but they are found up both coasts. They are definitely all the way to Tampa, and there's tons of them in Tampa. I've seen them there myself. I've heard that there's populations of them in downtown Jacksonville, so they can go pretty damn far. Wow. They're all over the interior as well. It seems if you know how to find them, once you see one, then you'll start seeing them all over the place. But until you basically are looking for this sort of triangular wedge-shaped head sticking out of a trunk that shouldn't be there. And once you know to see that, then you'll never be able to unsee it, and you'll see them driving when you're driving down the road at 40 miles an hour. You'll be like, night anole.
Oh man, I got some work to do then. I know my kids would get a kick out of that. They're obsessed with everything that has scales. So
the easiest way to find them is really on fruit trees. That's generally where, you can pick a mango tree or any kind of fruit tree that's growing in the area. I guarantee you they're there.
Wow. I've heard there's a lot of chameleons out there too, veiled chameleons.
Yeah, I've collected those in a couple different spots. There's veileds and panthers.
Yeah. Oh, there's panthers out there?
Yeah. Yeah, they're actually on the West Coast. They're catching panthers.
Huh.
They're also catching them in like Polk County, and but there's a lot of them on the West Coast. Apparently is a hot spot. I'm not sure how all that stuff got around. The veils used to be confined to one spot. I've heard that collectors caught them there and then set up their own personal honey holes all over the state, which, obviously and rightfully so pissed FWC off because they found out about it. So these guys took them they were originally in this place called LaBelle, which is on the grounds of where there was a cricket farm called Lucky Lure a long time ago. I don't know if it's still in business. Maybe it is. But the original owner liked veil chameleons, let a few go. They survived. They went everywhere. People found out about it. And then a bunch of hunters went over there and they caught a whole bunch of them. And then they set up their own spots and it just spiraled from there. So that's a problem.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, again, veil chameleons are perfectly suited for here. Panthers are too, honestly. They can both take pretty hot. They can take the cold without an issue. Fortunately, they're not really, it doesn't appear that they're really environmentally destructive. Like a lot of the introduced species here, they've done studies on them a few times. They don't really have an impact on the environment. They're mostly living in disturbed areas, already, basically destroyed by human development. Most of the things that are there that are native are dead. And these things are filling a niche, eating things like, various mostly non-native insects. I mean, all the trees are non-native for the most part in a lot of places. Like disturbed areas, everybody goes in, they get rid of all the native trees for the most part. They plant ornamental exotic trees. It's just what humans do.
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of those things that they call invasives, they're not actually invasives. They're introduced. They're non-native species that got here in a variety of reasons, some from the trade, some not. Most of them don't do anything, don't really harm the environment. It's not true that just because it's not from there that it's causing environmental destruction. Most of them do far less environmental destruction than the ultimate invasive species on this planet, which is us.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
I know it's so hilarious. It's maddening the amount of hatred that people have towards animals that were brought here by people, but they are totally blind to the condos and the parking lots and the Costcos and everything else. That's, that's not a problem. It's the animals, these little animals that are probably doing hardly anything. And I totally understand, like I used to see a ton of the green anoles when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And you see maybe like one every now and then now. They've been totally outcompeted, at least in my area.
So the green anole, it's kind of interesting because I have an undisturbed 10-acre property, pretty much. I mean, there's very few, it's in a very, there's not many people that live there. The 10 acres that we have is pretty much undisturbed. The green anole population in the undisturbed area is good. As soon as you get by near the disturbed areas, the green anoles disappear and there's tons of brown anoles. I don't think that I personally do not believe that brown anoles are actually outcompeting them. That's what we all thought.
Mm-hmm.
I think that green anoles just can't survive very well in disturbed habitat. That humans, again, we terraform our environment, but brown anoles, they don't give a shit. Brown anoles evolved on these islands that just get destroyed by hurricanes all the time. They go completely underwater. Brown anoles are a survivor. They're built to handle all kinds of things. Green anoles, though, are from a very delicate environment. So people move in, they terraform the environment. The green anoles hang on for a while. Eventually, they just go away because they can't do it. Their environment's it's too hot. Maybe it's too cold. Maybe there's not enough, preferred hiding areas like the types of trees where they live. It's more than likely something like that. Brown anoles are just everywhere, and I don't think it's a competition thing because brown anoles and green anoles inhabit two entirely different zones, and all of the Caribbean, the anoles are kind of stacked vertically. So you have a stump anole, which a brown anole would be classified as a stumper. The green anole would be more classified as a twig anole, which almost all the islands have a different twig anole. Those things live, compatibly with the ones beneath it. And then above them are usually a larger species of anole, oftentimes 10 to 12 inches. And then at the very top, you have the crown giants, which are the ones that I work on. Those are the big bruisers that live high up in the trees and basically feed on everybody beneath them that they can shove in their mouth. those animals have existed for hundreds of thousands, millions of years in this sort of thing. The green anole should have been able to not be really affected by the brown anole because they're essentially Florida's twig anole. So I don't really buy into that. I think that I think most of our problems really are us because of the way we just, the way we do stuff. I mean, that's just what we are. We're a terraforming creature. And so then you find these animals. Like when I was a kid in Miami, there was no wildlife. Most of the wildlife that lives there is non-native, and it's not non-native. It's just because it filled in the niche that was vacated because we destroyed everything. And then these things got introduced, and a lot of those things said, oh, look, they found that they could survive. So again, pet trade animals generally are the types of animals that can survive. They're hardy stuff. They're stuff that you can put in captivity in a box and it'll do well. So of course they're going to be able to, they can live in a variety of habitats. So they're going to be pretty well suited if they get loose in a city type environment. And at least back in the day, when you used to go out to the Everglades, there was virtually nothing out there. It was all native stuff. Now I know there are some outliers like Cuban tree frogs, which that's a pretty ruthless invader. And there are things like that, but most of those lizard species that the non-native ones, they don't do shit. They're inhabiting environments that are already totally terraformed by humans. They can't survive in pristine habitat for the most part. I mean, I have 10 acres of pristine habitat, and other than the brown anoles that are there and only around the houses, again, when I get away from the houses, I find there's a little swift that lives up there. I can't remember the name of it now, but it's like a scrub lizard. Mm-hmm. You don't see them near the house. But if you get like 50 feet out where we're no longer mowing the lawn and it's just a scrub oak, they're all over in there.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
I don't know, man.
It's kind of like the agamas. You never see them out in nature. They're always around buildings, like living under air conditioning units, and they. And then when you look them up, because I remember the first one I saw, I was just blown away by the color, and just wildly colorful. And I remember looking them up and seeing that they live on just rocks. That they're very fast. They hide in the rocks. And then it makes sense. Like, okay, what is a building to them? It's a massive rock structure.
Yep.
And which makes sense why green anoles wouldn't thrive around a house, because there's no rock structures in Florida. There's hardly any. The majority of it is sand and that's it.
Yeah, a lot of trees.
Yeah.
Yeah. And specific types of trees. So we generally, like I said, tend to knock those trees down, cut them out, and replace them with non-native trees. And I guess in some areas, I'm sure they can adapt to it, but if it's not, they're fragile. Mm-hmm. So I think that has way more to do with it. It's just none of this shit is as simple as. And honestly, the reason most people are outraged is because the media told them to be outraged. But if you actually, where's the, I don't know. It's just like everything else, man. It's, if it bleeds, it leads. Anything that you can turn into a crisis, you will. Like, it doesn't matter what side, they all do the same shit. Mm-hmm. So I just think that that's just a continuation. That it happens with everything. It doesn't matter if it's politics or anything else. It's the same cycle over and over again. It's just, selling papers, man. Well, actually, we don't sell papers anymore. We sell clicks, but Oh
yeah. Yeah. Everything is clickbait. And I'm always terrified anytime I see any kind of snake or lizard or anything getting in the news locally. It's always bad. It's always bad. Yeah.
I read the comments a couple times on a few of those stories and I regretted it. I was like, I just don't need to know. This is how idiots think.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I went into the comments and made some comments and I was like, what am I doing? I remember I have app timers on my social media, And I remember one of them, I was like, I was probably 3 paragraphs deep in a reply to some idiot. And my app timer went off and I was like, thank you. And I, just put my phone away.
Don't feed the trolls, man.
I know. It's just terrible though when you love these animals and you're passionate about them.
Yeah.
And people are just talking about murdering them,
Right.
in the most ruthless ways possible. And you could never imagine it if it was a dog. If somebody saw a cat in their neighborhood, and then the Herald Tribune puts a cat up in a neighborhood, and everybody's talking about how they're going to go out and kill that cat.
Yeah,
and all the different ways that they can do it.
Yeah, it's Florida problems.
Yeah. You see many, have you interacted with many of the wild berms, the Florida python?
So that's funny because when I was a kid in the 80s, we used to catch a fair amount of African rock pythons in a place that nobody ever talks about. So I don't think people even know they're there. They're right in the city, like literally on canal banks in a concrete jungle. I grabbed a 16-foot one day that almost dragged me in the water. And I caught gravid ones. I caught babies. They're in a canal where there used to be a bunch of importers. It runs right alongside the FEC railway. And they've been there since the 80s. They're still there as far as I know, because I know somebody who caught one in 2010. So I assume they're still there anyway. You never see anybody talk about this spot. I don't think anybody knows they're there. They live in culverts, drainage culverts. There's caiman there too. And they're totally locked, right? They can't go anywhere. The FEC railway and Miami International Airport are right there. So it's right behind the airport. And it's basically a concrete jungle, and they're stuck on this canal bank. And when I was a kid, we used to drop our boat in that canal, little, shitty aluminum bass boat, and put a little trolling motor on it. We'd go up the canal. We'd be catching iguanas, and on cold mornings, we would catch African rock pythons.
That's crazy.
So I never actually have bothered with the berms, just because I don't know what's the point. It's kind of like I used to breed berms when I was a kid. It was one of the first snakes I ever bred. And I don't know. I just have no, I mean, it'd be cool if anytime I do go down there, I do look, you know what I'm saying? I mean, if I'm down in Homestead, down in South Florida, I will drive around briefly. I'll try to kind of aim my, wherever I'm going, I'll try to get out there a little bit. But I mean, I did that last week for rattlesnakes. So I've yet to see an Eastern Diamondback in the wild other than a dead one on the road. So
thank you. Me too.
Right. Right.
I've seen I think 3 dead ones in my whole life. I've been here. I was born here 34 years ago. And
yep. Dude, they're a tough one to find, man. I know guys that go out and find a bunch of them. They find them every time they go out. I have gone to multiple hot spots over the last 20 some years, 30 years. I've never seen one. Every time I find them, they're dead on the road. And then I'm just like, what the hell?
I don't feel bad now. I
just want to see one in the wild. Like I've seen plenty of them in captivity. My buddy, Greg Graziani has albinos, and I've, gone over there and seen his mess with them and stuff. I love that stuff. Like, honestly, venomous stuff, not venomous, but large pit vipers, I find very, very interesting, and the tree vipers. So if it wasn't for the permitting system and the fact that, my ex-wife, I had a kid and she didn't want any venomous stuff. So I never really bothered with that. And Heather has a kid as well, and she doesn't really want any venomous stuff in the house. But if it wasn't for that, I'd probably have gaboons and rhino vipers and a big collection of rattlesnakes, because I love rattlesnakes. But, it's one of those things but I always look. I mean, I had to go to Bradenton last week for something, and on the way back, I had to go to my parents' house in Lake Placid, which is on 70 directly and 27. So it's a straight shot, and that's through rattlesnake country. And I even went to a couple spots, and nothing. I never find anything. I've gone in the winter, I've gone in the spring, I've gone in the fall. My property in Lake Placid should have rattlesnakes. I found a dead one on the road right near, and there's like 40 gopher tortoises on the 10 acres. at least there's gopher tortoises all over it. So I'm like, oh, there's got to be diamondbacks here. And I lived there for like 10 years, and I would go out on cold mornings and walk it. I saw lots of indigos. I saw pine snakes. I'd look at the entrance of the burrows. I'm like, one of these days it's going to be a big diamondback. Nope, never saw one. But one day I drove to the end of my street, which is literally 5 houses down from where I live. There's a big dead diamondback right in the road. So
my neighbor came up to me one day. Well, so I've got two stories. Back when I used to work at a pet store, one of the managers sent along some pictures, and there was a big rattlesnake that bit his Jack Russell on the face. And yeah, the dog died. And then he of course had to seek out retribution and shot the snake.
Right.
Because obviously once they get, the taste of dog blood, then that's all they feed on.
Right.
And then my neighbor just recently, within a year, comes up and he's like, Adam, I got a rattlesnake. And I'm like, oh my God. And I grab a hook and a bucket and I'm so excited. And he's like, oh, I already ran it over. It was crossing the street and I steered towards it and crushed it. And I'm like, yeah. That was depressing. It was, I'll send you pictures of it. I think it was like 34 inches long.
Yeah, that's I have to wonder when I do see them dead. I'm like, man, was this? I mean, I've run over snakes myself. You're going 70 miles an hour, something crosses in front of you. It's either that thing or you're going to eat a ditch. It's going to be the snake. So I think most of them that are hit are like that. They're just kind of accidents. But then you see a big old diamondback like that, and you're like, man, whoever get that, because they're easy to see because they're big and they stick out. It's not like a corn snake that kind of hunkers down in the asphalt. It's hard to see until you're right on top of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know, man. It's just one of those lifers that eventually I'll get it.
Yeah. Same here. What about the pygmies? Have you seen the pygmies?
Oh yeah, dude. When I was a kid, I used to sell pygmies to reptile dealers. I got spots. I had spots in South Florida that I could go out on a cool morning in the spring and collect 30, 40 of those things in like an hour and a half. There was some good spots back in the day. This was in like the 80s when there was a big demand for, everybody was building their breeding, their future breeding stock. And I had a spot where you would get these unusually orange ones. They had a lot of orange. So these guys I think they were paying me $7 a piece for them. And I used to skip school with a buddy of mine. He had a van, and we would drive way the hell out to this levee that was out in the middle of nowhere. And that levee I also caught Brooks Kings on that levee. That levee was amazing. So, and at the time, everybody wanted Brooks Kings for their breeding programs, and this was a spot where you could actually get them. So that was the only real native stuff that I really ever did was that. And eventually I moved on to iguanas. Ended up being like a thing, as I was getting paid a lot of money for iguanas back then, relatively speaking. Like they would pay $10 a foot, and anything over 4 feet was $75. And if it was over 5 feet, it was $125.
Whoa.
So yeah, people were buying them up. That was wholesale. So I was selling those to dealers.
And what were they doing? Breeding the big ones?
They were selling them to people that wanted them, I guess, for pets or breeding or whatever. But Miami was full of them back then.
Yeah.
So I used to catch most of them on the Key Biscayne golf course. So we used to sneak in there at night, and every once in a while you get chased out by security. But most of the time we would get in the mangrove swamp and in the water, and nobody would see you down there.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that was spent a lot of time there. Caught a lot of crazy stuff on that island. There was a lot of stuff there in the 80s. That's
so cool. If there was one thing I could keep venomous, it would be the blue insularis.
Oh yeah, those are I love that
sweet.
Stuff. Yeah, for sure. I love that stuff. I got a few buddies that breed a bunch of different stuff like that, and I kind of live vicariously through their social media posts. People that do squams, people that do rattlesnakes, people that have insularis, and all that stuff, man.
All right, Ron. Well, I appreciate you coming on. man, we talked about all sorts of cool stuff, and I think I want to start keeping snakes outside.
Sounds like a plan, man.
And maybe lizards. I don't know. I'm excited about keeping outside.
Yeah, I mean, if you can do it, man, it's beneficial to everybody, to you and them. So it's definitely it's fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All right. Well, thank you, sir.
Yeah, man.